Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Lisa, I'm telling you, Mom's only coming for a couple days. It's a couple days more than she needs, but when are you two going to stop fighting? You two are impossible to reason with. Alvin, as usual, shook his hands and left the room, which meant that he was not going to discuss anything else today, and his decision regarding his mother's arrival would remain unchanged. We didn't finish the conversation. Lisa was not going to give up so easily. I did. You're both equally dear to me. I don't want to be torn between you trying to reconcile you. Alvin, I spent 5 years honestly trying to please her, being nice, being open, giving her gifts, giving her the granddaughter your mother always dreamed of. And what did I get? Rudeness, insults, tons of dirt behind her back and in her eyes, and the cherry on the cake, a demand for DNA testing to confirm your paternity. Don't you think your mom's a little over the top? Like 1,000 times. The woman was being completely sincere. 5 years ago, she literally agreed to get married after a couple dates. Her husband's family took her coolly. They thought that their son deserved more than a single mother with a child in her arms. They did not take into account such trifles as higher education, a prestigious position before maternity, and the prospect of returning to it with a promotion, reading, high moral principles. In general, in another situation, Lisa wouldn't even look in the direction of Alvin, but fate gave her an extremely poor choice: to marry and bring up her son in a full family, or to become a single mother, behind whose back neighbors whispered without ceasing. Beautiful, intelligent, and self-confident Lisa has always strived to be the best. Studying, sports, dancing, she had no equal in any case she took on. The only area that the girl did not devote time to socializing with the opposite sex, it was as if she did not notice the amorous looks of classmates, trying not to notice or quickly turning the boy into friends. The girl, by the end of school, managed not to spin a single novel. Girlfriends could not understand her, because even the most enviable handsome were rejected. Suitors gradually found more affordable options and disappeared from the horizon. About the reason for this behavior, she did not tell anyone, and she was banal and simple. Her father is an alkie. Daily scandals, parents, obscene appearance and behavior of the father contributed to the fact that the girl decided for herself not to repeat the fate of her mother. No man, no problems, but you can pay attention to your studies, career, self-development. Lisa was the only child in the family, and therefore she had no one to share her worries with. If she had a close friend or an older sister, she would have explained that her father's behavior was not normal, and that there were many worthy men in the world who could create a strong and loving family. Lisa, your number was asked again by that cute new boy from the parallel. Her friends were actively trying to interfere in her personal life. Cute? You saw him? Yeah, shock. Figure, face, dressed in style. But give him your number too. Why are you so lost? You know, I'm not interested. If I didn't know you, I'd have thought you were a girl since kindergarten. Laughed friend. Listen, that's an idea. Why don't you tell all the handsome boys that I'm chasing you? Lisa was fed up with the almost daily suggestions, confessions, and attempts at loneliness on the part of her friends. Let's not do this. Graduation is coming up, and I don't need this kind of fame at all. Mary smiled. Even she didn't know why Lisa was so actively avoiding guys. After school, the girl entered 2 prestigious universities at once and was able to combine full-time study in one and part-time in the other. Thus, a few years later, she had a law degree and a translator from English and German, a perfect combination for working abroad. It was moving to another country that was her cherished dream. Thanks to the successful defense of her diploma, she quickly found a good job, which meant traveling abroad and the possibility of transferring to one of the foreign branches. All her plans went nowhere when in one beautiful evening she met him. That day, she was delayed in training, and waiting for public transportation was almost impossible. When she saw an expensive foreign car pull up to the stop, the girl was a little frightened. However, a tall, athletic, and very handsome young man got out of the car and offered to give her a ride home. Naturally, she politely refused. Then he drove the car to the parking lot and went to walk her home. During the hour they spent on the road, they had time to talk about everything. It turned out that they had a lot in common: favorite books, music, passion for sports. The young man impressed her with his manners. He was well-read, erudite, and attentive. The story began as in a cheap novel. Beautiful courtship, expensive gifts, talking until morning. Brian was amazing, the likes of which she had never met. Most importantly, he was the complete opposite of her father, who was for the girl a model of what a man should not be under any circumstances. No wonder the girl fell in love. The feelings that she finally allowed to take possession of her heart were so beautiful, new, and exciting that she was ready to do anything for the sake of her beloved. All the power of the first crush she put into this relationship. Even her colleagues, with whom she kept a strictly professional relationship, began to notice the change in her. "Lisa, you're especially mysterious today. Has our modest girl fallen in love?" The secretary of the boss did not hide her delight at the changes that had taken place in the girl. The new girl was well received at work, seeing how hard she was working. Unfortunately, behind the veil of love, she did not notice the obvious. The young man never spent holidays together, tried not to appear with her in public places, did not introduce her to friends, and was almost always busy at weekends. The more experienced girl guessed the reason for this behavior. For Lisa, the truth was revealed only on the day when she saw 2 stripes on the test in the morning and decided to make her lover happy. "Brian, I have a small, or rather, very big and amazingly beautiful gift for you." Blushing, said the girl, handing the young man a small box tied with a neat golden bow. "Sweetheart." From this word, the girl's legs just shook. "I asked you not to give me gifts. You do not have such financial resources, and it should be a man. This gift is special. I'm sure you will be pleased." However, on the face of her beloved, she read the whole gamut of emotions, among which there was neither joy, nor happiness, nor delight. Favorite features distorted grimace of disgust and anger. He closed the box abruptly and threw it to the ground. "I hope this is a joke. Brian, are you not happy?" The girl was confused and didn't know how she should react. "Are you crazy? Have you tried to think with your head?" "Brian, what are you doing?" "It was unexpected for me too, and it will affect my plans a lot. But this is our child, the fruit of our love. It's the product of your endless stupidity. Do you really think I want it? Or did you do it on purpose to get money out of me?" "Well, the most you can expect is that I'll pay for the termination of your pregnancy. After that, you'll be out of my life and out of my family's life." "Your what?" "My family. You got a hearing problem all of a sudden." Lisa stared at this rude, cold, selfish man and couldn't believe she was looking at the same perfect, loving, gentle, generous Brian she'd been dating for almost 6 months. "What do you mean?" "Oh, come on. Are you so stupid you didn't realize I'm married?" "I'm not gonna leave my wife for you in this." The man nodded squeamishly toward the girl's belly. "I'm not going to terminate the pregnancy. I was diagnosed with serious problems in high school. It is contraindicated for me." The girl spoke in a colorless voice, as if she had been drained of all her life force. Come on, people like you give birth like cats." Seeing how the girl was confused, not knowing what to say. Apparently, she wasn't lying about her health, he said a little softened. "I'll pay you the best clinic. Everything will be done as correctly and accurately as possible. It will not affect your health. You will have time to have more children, but this child should not be born. I don't need these problems. My father-in-law is a very powerful man. If he finds out I've been horny with his daughter, it'll be both you and me." It seemed that he still had some feelings for the girl. His tone became so official, as if he was selling a car in an elite salon. "No need, I'm not going to demand anything from you. Goodbye." Lisa abruptly turned around and walked towards the bus stop. Her condition after what she had heard did not even allow her to cry. Brian was not going to leave the last word to her. He caught up with her, grabbed her arm roughly and turned her around. "You don't seem to understand what I said. You're not having this baby. What are you going to raise it on? You just got your degree a couple months ago, no place to live, no savings. You're gonna live on welfare. Where are you gonna live with him? With a drunk daddy?" A girl confided in her lover her deepest secret, the tragedy of their life for her father. "Brian, I won't change my mind. If you don't want the baby, I'm not forcing it on you. Let me through, I'm late. Your son's gonna grow up to be a juvenile delinquent. He'll hate you for the life you'll give him." The man was ready to tear her apart, still holding her hand. The girl had serious concerns that he wanted to push her down the stairs. It could be the girl. Lisa suddenly realized that all the feelings she had for this man had evaporated, burst like a soap bubble. "If you are so frightened by my precarious financial situation, I am ready to make a bilateral agreement that I will not declare you the father and demand money." A strange premonition told Lisa to protect herself and the future child. And on the other hand, what are my responsibilities? I could hear the interest in the man's voice. And on the other hand, you will never appear in our lives and will not claim to communicate with the child. Are you out of your mind? What do I want with this degenerate? So it's decided. Let's go. No, I'll draw up the contract myself, and we'll get it signed tomorrow. I'm afraid my expertise in this matter won't be enough for you. I'll pick you up at 10 o'clock. They were practically enemies when they parted. She'd never been so devastated in her life. The remnants of her faith in men and their decency had burned away, leaving a disgusting residue on her soul. All men are the same after all, unreliable, irresponsible liars. The next day, they signed an agreement and parted for good. At least that's what Lisa hoped for with all her soul. It was painful and hurtful to become a single mother, but deep down, the girl had no regrets. She never wanted to get married, but she had always dreamed of becoming a mother. She was the only child in the family. Her mother decided not to have more children when her father started drinking. The girl always envied her friends who had brothers and sisters, especially the younger ones. She liked to take care of them, and now she was going to have a child of her own. Lisa realized that it would be very difficult for her, but she did not dare to terminate the pregnancy. The risk was too great that this child was her only chance for motherhood. The doctor who monitored her pregnancy supported her in her decision to keep the baby, no matter what. You know, nowadays so many women are treated for infertility. Someone in their youth was seriously ill. Someone had an abortion. Someone seems to be healthy, but there are no children. You can find a man with a child, but infertility, few people will be happy. Besides, such an obstruction as you have very often passes after childbirth. The body recovers, don't worry. You're smart, grown up, with education and a job. Some people give birth in worse conditions and do not worry. Besides, there are measures to support single mothers. You can even live with your child for a while in a special hostel. Some girls live there for quite a long time, find a job, look after each other's children. I have a place to live and a job. Besides, I can come back after my maternity leave. I hope I can. But even more so, you doubt it. But if you come up with an idea, you don't have more than 2 weeks. I'm not second-guessing my decision. A child doesn't ask its parents to show up. If they don't have the brains to take action and not get pregnant, you can't blame it on the baby. Lisa was glad to have someone to support her. The second person was the mom. She was worried about her daughter's future, but tried not to show it. She promised to support her in any decision she made. She was able to explain to the boss that she was ready to work remotely, if possible, and to go half a day after the birth of the child. She was met and guaranteed to keep her place. The boss did not plan to lose the promising girl so easily. 7 months later, she went on maternity leave, and after another month on Christmas night, the biggest gift and the most long-awaited person, her son, was born. As she feared, his father did not take the news of his grandson well. While she worked, rented a room, and rarely came home, he limited himself to insults and taunts. Well, our perfect you brought in the hem after all? Who knocked you up? Did you pay off your boss for the position? Or did you find someone easier? Lisa tried not to listen to the nasty things her father was always generous with. It seemed that his supply of nasty things was simply inexhaustible. When the young woman came home from the maternity hospital with her son, the real nightmare began. The drunken man organized daily scandals, demanded that she and the child get out of his house. Even periodic visits from the police had no effect. After 6 months of such a life, the woman firmly decided to leave the parental home. Without income and with a child in her arms, it was problematic, so her mother offered her a logical at that time to marry. This option seemed to her the only possible, so she would get the status of a married woman. Behind the back would stop whispering neighbors, and the child would have a full family, but these reasons were just a cover. In reality, Lisa was exhausted mentally and physically. She simply could not find the strength to think of any other way out of the situation. Sitting in the kitchen one evening, they decided that they should choose the quietest, calmest, and non-drinker. So there was at least some hope that the husband will not become a copy of his father. She chose the most deserving one, in her opinion. Alvin lived in a neighboring district, worked as an automobile mechanic. Having finished 11 grades, he went to the army, and after it, he worked for several years for himself, often changing jobs. He didn't grab stars from the sky, Lisa's mother often said. Most importantly, he got along well with little Thomas, who wouldn't go into the arms of anyone but his mother and grandmother. Alvin was ready to get married. He was not embarrassed by the child, so they did not delay the wedding. After a modest wedding, the young family moved into Alvin's apartment, which had been given to them by their grandmother when they were still at school. It was unusual for a woman to wake up and fall asleep without screams and insults from her father. The husband was indeed calm, but a little jealous. She attributed this to insecurity. With the son, the husband got along with her, treated her with care and reverence. The woman simply did not believe her own happiness. The only thing that alarmed the young woman, the mother of the future spouse. She did not hide her contemptuous attitude to the young woman, despite the fact that she was not a peer, was rather her son than a newfound daughter-in-law. The woman thought that this person had rounded up her son and forced him to marry her. After the wedding, she came to the apartment to the newlyweds and made an ugly scandal with insults and breaking dishes. The husband did not stand up for Lisa, justifying his mother's behavior by the fact that she was always jealous of him with girls. Such behavior became the norm in their relationship. Calm, attentive in ordinary days, next to his mother, her husband changed dramatically. She made him dance to her tune, which is why she decided to minimize communication with her husband's relatives. Neither she nor her son went to any of their family celebrations. The situation may have changed when Lisa and Alvin had a daughter. They came to her parents' house to introduce their granddaughter. The new grandmother didn't last long. "She's not like us. She took one of her kids on my son. Now she's taking the other one for a walk." "Alvin, aren't you going to object?" "Mom, stop it. They're my kids, and don't insult me and my wife with that kind of innuendo." It was obvious that the man was reluctant to intervene. Ever since he was a child, he had been trained not to cross his mother. God gave him a daughter-in-law who was a whore. What about our eldest daughter-in-law, smart, beautiful with education, live abroad, prestigious work, in the hem of the husband do not bring unclear whose children? The last statement overflowed the cup of Lisa's patience. She gathered the children and left the apartment of her husband's parents with the firm intention of never seeing these people again. 3 years have passed since then. The children went to kindergarten, and the woman was able to go to work. Fortunately, 2 red diplomas and excellent knowledge had had the desired effect. She no longer tried to make contact with her spouse's relatives. Alvin traveled alone to visit them. Not long ago, his older brother and his spouse returned. At one time, they did not stop by until attending Alvin and Lisa's wedding. Neither made any attempt to socialize, or at least get acquainted, after their return. A year later, after the birth of their daughter, Lisa's father passed away, and her mother finally had the opportunity to live for herself. Repeated attempts to divorce her drinking husband ended in beatings and harassment. Once, her father almost burned down the apartment where Mom lived after she left him. After that, she gave up all attempts to leave, trying to simply survive. Lisa supported Mom financially, and in turn, she helped a lot with the grandchildren. The children did not know that in addition to their beloved grandmother, they had another grandmother, grandfather, and uncle. There were periodic conflicts in the family. The husband was jealous of the woman's colleagues, believing that she went to work only to find a lover. The woman knew where these accusations were coming from, but tried to smooth over the conflicts. Within a year, she was able to move up the career ladder significantly, thanks to persistence, diligence, and a huge amount of knowledge. However, her husband's mother had her own version of the fast promotion. "Son, you should be more careful in the doors. Horns will spoil them for us." Jokes of this kind became the norm in communication with Alvin. "Mom, I told you before, I don't like that kind of innuendo." "What hints? I'm telling you plainly, your wife is sleeping with the right people, so she went up the career ladder." "Mom, think about what you're saying." "She has 2 higher education. She sat every day over the textbooks, so that in the maternity do not forget all that she learned. In addition, she additionally works at home, writes thesis coursework for students. I earn several times less than her, gifts for the holidays, by the way, she also bought. So let her choke on them. I don't need anything from her." The woman defiantly threw in the trash an expensive hair dryer and razor, which her son brought them as a gift for their wedding anniversary. "Mom, by the way, these are not cheap things. They cost as much as my monthly paycheck. If you don't want to use it, give it to someone else. After all, take pity on your father. He doesn't see his grandchildren because of your feud. It's a great misfortune not to see other people's children. There's a whole brood of kids in the sandbox outside. You can pick anyone and sit and admire them." Sometimes Alvin looked at his mother and did not understand how it was possible to be such a disgusting person. And how all these years his father endures such a woman beside him. Mother, I forbid you even to hint that Betty is not my daughter. In your own house you will forbid it, but here I am the mistress. You're afraid to say a word in your own house. You're afraid to show your horns. You know, Mom, I learned that from my father. He's been afraid to say a word against you all his life. You see, this snake wants to break us up on purpose, so that you stop communicating with your parents and family. She's setting you against us, you Megara. She's forgotten about you. She only buys presents on holidays. She's trying. She needs you. My brother arrived 2 months ago. Have you ever seen him? No, because that bastard doesn't allow it. She fooled you around and is happy that she took you away from your family. Mom, Alvin sat down in the chair tiredly. Brian doesn't want to see me, and I've tried several times. He always has reasons to refuse to see me because he has no time, or his wife has other plans, or they have another examination. I don't understand why they came back at all, as if they couldn't find suitable doctors abroad. Stop saying that. Kathy's trying to give us an heir. She's healing. She's not giving up hope. Not like your rat, who's had babies from who knows who. The marriage was unequal, but the bride's father saw potential in his son-in-law. A year after the wedding, the young family moved to live abroad. Their capable Brian headed a branch of his father-in-law's firm, ideal in every respect family life, marred only by the lack of children. The young wife was treated in the most famous clinics, passing endless examinations. The husband only once allowed himself to be examined, motivated by the fact that he has in this regard, everything is fine. The second son, Alvin, the mother did not particularly complain. He grew up disobedient, brawling, and mischievous. He found it difficult to study, and in his spare time he preferred to chase pigeons in the yard rather than sit over books. Completely uninterested in anything, he barely finished school. His parents and brother tried to influence him, but it had no effect. His mother did not consider her youngest son worthy of her attention, so she was rather cool to his idea to get married. Everything changed when she personally met the future younger daughter-in-law. At the time when the brother got married and moved abroad, Alvin was serving in the army. It appeared that the brothers had not seen each other for many years, and on Brian's part, there was no effort to remedy this. The favorite son was a frequent guest at his parents' house, but never crossed paths with his younger brother. Whenever Alvin warned that he was going to visit them, the older brother would find 1,000 reasons to postpone the visit. The younger brother was hurt by this neglect, but there was nothing he could do about it. One day the father quietly said that the eldest son and the mother had some secrets, and they concerned the Alvin family. Son, be careful with Lisa. This couple is up to something bad. And now, quite unexpectedly, Alvin's mother decided to change her long-standing anger into mercy and come to visit her youngest son, and not just to come, but to stay overnight. She hadn't planned to ask her daughter-in-law's permission, even her son. Rather than warn her, she had put her in front of the fact. After his father's warning, Alvin was wary of his mother's initiative. However, the most difficult thing was to convince her spouse to accept such an unpleasant relative at home. Lisa, I told you, Mom's only coming for a couple of days. That's a couple days more than she needs. But when are you two going to stop feuding? You're both impossible to reason with. No one's ever tried to reason with me. For years I've been listening to a torrent of filth about my infidelity, about leaving you horns, giving birth to Betty from who knows who, giving you a son. By the way, you knew I had a child before we were married, and it didn't bother you. If it was so important to you, why didn't you tell me before the wedding? Because I've loved him from day one like he was my own. They are equally dear to me, and people around me say that he looks like me. Lisa was tempted to stay overnight at her mother's house, but her hated mother-in-law might take this as cowardice, and she had never been a coward. Therefore, after sitting at work for as long as possible, having done all the accumulated work, she slowly went home by the farthest road. Never in her life had she felt such a heavy reluctance to go home. Usually she hurried from work, anticipating communication with her beloved family. Today she had to endure a serious test, but she was not going to avoid her mother-in-law. Besides, she was on her own turf and could always kick the hated relative out the door. Carefully opening the door, Lisa entered the apartment. It was quiet. She even thought that the mother-in-law changed her mind and did not go to them. However, after a minute, the woman heard muffled voices from the living room. Mother and son were talking about something. The woman had not intended to eavesdrop, but as she headed for the bathroom, she heard Alvin's mother say her name and involuntarily listened. I'm telling you, you're Lisa. For once, her mother-in-law called her daughter-in-law by her first name. She got Thomas pregnant with Brian, knowing he was married. She wanted to tear his family apart and marry him off. She demanded money to keep quiet so her wife wouldn't find out, so they wouldn't be at your wedding. I was afraid she was crazy. She'd ruin his life. I saw them several times when she was out with him. That's why I couldn't accept her. I almost ruined the family of one son, and I took up the second one. If you had kids of your own, you'd understand. I have kids of my own. One more comment like that, and you're going home. The buses don't run anymore, or are you going to put your own mother out on the street like a dog? However, this time, the woman didn't come to sling mud at her daughter-in-law. She had a plan, and her youngest son needed to be lured into being an ally. And now they're having problems. They can't give birth, so I decided. Why don't you give Thomas and his wife away? He's his son, and you'll still have a girl, or you'll have more. Your girl gives birth on demand, so maybe you'll have one. Mom, stop it. I told you I won't tolerate this attitude. Why didn't you tell me before that Thomas was my nephew? How could you know all these years and not tell me? And how could you think of taking a child away from its mother? Well, that's where you're gonna help us. We need to make you recognized as a bad mother, then it will be possible to conduct a DNA examination, prove paternity, and take away the child. Inadequate fulfillment of parental rights, body lifestyle, your wife fits such a characteristic, and you will testify in court later, beat him, snapped at everyone, did not take care of the children. I'll tell you how and what to say. Lisa is a wonderful mother. Anybody can tell you that. A great mom who left the kids to grandma. As you can see, I'm well informed. Is that why my brother didn't want to see me? Alvin tried to change the subject. Why would he want to see you? You were never friends. You were no match for him. What would you talk about? And your viper could have seen him. They have a perfect family. Only a child is missing. And here is a ready grown-up boy. No need to wash diapers. No need to spoil his figure with freaks. Alvin listened to his mother and could not believe his own ears. She was talking about the fate of her grandson, as if he was an unimportant thing. Mom, aren't you curious about this? I guess me, Lisa. Thomas? Who's gonna ask you? The boy's got a chance to grow up in a normal family, with money and opportunities, and what are you going to give him? Your stupid swimming and sculpting lessons? Don't make me laugh. You should be grateful that your brother is doing you such a favor. But let's say you don't care about our feelings. What about Brian's wife? Kathy, would you mind bringing up the child her ideal husband's mistress gave birth to? If I'm counting correctly, he started dating Lisa literally months after the wedding. I doubt she's his only one, and she didn't know Thomas' father was married. She told me their story, and how scrumptious her brother was when he sent her for an abortion. He didn't want a son then. Has he changed his mind now? I didn't know. That sneaky bitch, setting it up on purpose. Lisa stood outside the door and couldn't believe what she was hearing. The whole story was like the plot of a lowbrow movie. To give birth to one brother and marry another. How small the world was and how different the brothers were. She had never imagined that the perfect Brian, her husband's older brother, the one her mother-in-law had told her so much about, and who had never condescended to meet in person, would turn out to be the Brian she had fallen in love with all those years ago. The one she'd idealized so much and who'd done such a disgusting thing to her. She'd stopped thinking about him a long time ago. After all, if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have a son, and for that alone he could be forgiven and forgotten. And now her mother-in-law had a nightmarish and disgusting plan that could ruin her family, her life. She knew Brian's capabilities. It would cost him nothing to bribe anyone and get all the necessary certificates to take her son away. There was a faint hope for the contract he'd signed when he'd learned of the pregnancy. But for a man like that, a piece of paper was hardly an obstacle. Lisa pressed her hands to her temples, the blood in her veins pulsing so hard that it seemed that the thin vessels were about to burst. Now it was becoming clear, and the reason for such a strong hatred, mother-in-law to Lisa. The old Megara was afraid that her perfect son would be thrown out by his new rich relatives. For years she had scoffed, claiming that Lisa's daughter had strayed, even though it turned out that both her children, the birth grandchildren to this soulless woman. What kind of monster was now sitting in her living room? It had been hidden from her for years that the man she had loved, who had betrayed her and whom she tried not to remember, was a close relative of her husband. It was good to know that her husband was also uninvolved in the secret. It seemed that the mother-in-law and her favorite son-in-law were keeping this information for a rainy day. But how did they even come to this, to take Thomas away from her? Lisa had never doubted that her mother-in-law was completely devoid of human feelings, but she had tried not to think about Brian for many years and had not expected such a move from him. During their last meeting, when they had made a contract, he had not expressed a desire for further communication. Perhaps the idea of a child came into the mother-in-law's head because Brian and his wife had not been able to have a child of their own for many years. Perhaps the mother-in-law wanted to preserve their family, but not to let in a stranger child from the orphanage. However, the scariest thing was that the woman decided to slander her daughter-in-law, collect certificates about her incapacity, and take away the child. Apparently, the mother-in-law did not think about the fact that she would destroy the family of her youngest son. The main thing for her has always been the eldest. Alvin grew like a field of grass. His birth was not planned, and the mother did not even try to hide from her son that she had made many attempts to get rid of the unwanted pregnancy, and now she was trying to destroy her son's family. In any case, it was impossible to justify such a heinous act, and Lisa decided to stop her mother-in-law from talking to Alvin. She entered the room at the very moment when her husband was running out of arguments and wanted to just kick his mother out the door. During the years of his marriage to Lisa, he had grown so tired of his mother's constant attacks on his family that he was ready to break off the relationship, and the monstrous proposal she had made to him was impossible not to understand, not to forgive. Alvin and his mother turned towards her at the same time. It seemed to Lisa that there was a flicker of relief in her husband's eyes. He would no longer have to fight off his mother alone. "Get out, and don't come near my house and my family again, or I'll tear you to pieces. Even if I go to jail, I'll go out and live in a beautiful world that will be free from such a vile viper like you." Lisa grabbed her mother-in-law by the elbow and finally gave Will, accumulated for many years of resentment and rage. Let me go. Alvin, get that crazy woman out of here. Mom, it's your own fault. She didn't do anything to you. This is the first time a husband has ever openly stood up to Lisa and gone against his mother. I'll wipe you both out. You'll have no children at all. I'll put you out of work, out of money, and out of a place to live. The woman shrieked like a mad woman, cursing her son and his wife. Lisa, almost by the scruff of the neck, dragged her husband's mother to the staircase landing, not paying attention to the screams and curses that she kept on hurling, slammed the door. The woman slid down on the floor on the wall without strength and burst into tears. There was a lot of grief and hatred in her life, but she certainly did not deserve such an attitude from her mother-in-law, and now she was crying from helplessness, realizing that such a vile woman would not leave them alone. The husband stood in the middle of the hallway, not knowing how to act, to calm his wife or rush to bring his mother, whose screams were heard throughout the entrance. Neighbors had already begun to respond to the lamentations and requests for help. It was heard that the woman was approached with an offer of help. This half-witted smashed my head, broke my arm, insulted me with the last words, "I'm barely alive." I got away from them. Kind people, call an ambulance and the police. This can't be left like this. After these words, Lisa raised her crying face to her husband and said, "It's time for you to choose. Either you protect the family and now somehow influence your mother, or you stay with her on her side and now leave for good. I don't intend to put up with this anymore. I will file a police report on her tomorrow, and believe me, I will point out everything there, the insults, the slander, and the attempts to take the child away." Alvin could not believe that his own mother could do such a despicable thing to his family. He always felt and knew he was not a favorite child. A disappointment, that's what his mother had always called him. Against his successful, intelligent, driven brother, he was always an annoyance. It's a tough family. Sighed his mother in response to the teacher's complaints about the teenager's poor academic performance and bad behavior. He wanted so much to make her proud of him. He'd chosen the most beautiful and intelligent woman to marry, hoping her mother would appreciate it, but she'd hated Lisa as if she'd done something nasty to her, and today he'd learned the reason for that attitude. He did not understand how his mother could think of such a thing. He had loved little Thomas from the first day and could not imagine his life without him. Without considering his opinion, his mother decided to help preserve the family of the eldest son by destroying the family happiness of the youngest. It seemed that at this moment in Alvin's soul, everything he had spent many years creating crumbled. He was about to lose half of his family, and he really couldn't decide which half to choose. He was afraid to even imagine life without his wife, daughter, son, who also turned out to be his own nephew. But it was also scary to cut all ties with his parents and brother. Most of all, he felt sorry for his father, whose mother had definitely forbidden any contact with him. Sighing, Alvin went to the landing, grabbed his mother under her arm, and dragged her forcefully toward the exit. Once outside, he threw her on a bench and let the emotions that had built up in him over the years come out. "Mom, I'm warning you for the last time. Leave my family alone. If you do 1/10 of what you've planned, I swear to you, you and Brian are going to wish you hadn't thought of this in the first place. I will wipe you out. Believe me, I have ample opportunity to remind you that my wife is a successful lawyer, and how many people I have in my car repair shop, you have never dreamed. You could be sure that I will involve them all, and the wife of my brother. It is high time to learn about his crystal integrity, although perhaps let her father first learn about it. He's not the last man in town, so let it influence his son-in-law. Maybe his daughter's horns will stop growing so fast. You wouldn't dare," Mother hissed. Who do you think you are? You're nothing compared to your brother, a loser, a failure, a nothing, an empty space. And yet this nothing will defend his family. Thomas is my son. I've been planning to adopt him for a long time. Now I'm going to adopt him. We have a full, happy family. I told you not to do it. The woman didn't even seem to think that her spineless youngest son would dare to disobey. You won't believe it. I'm not going to listen to you. Alvin said with a laugh. He felt that he had been silent for years, and now he had a voice. He wanted to say everything. The DNA will show that Brian is his father anyway. Yeah, and it'll also show that we're related to him. Plus, Lisa has a pledge signed by your eldest that he has no claim to her child. Don't tell me you didn't know that. I did, but that stupid girl drew it up herself. I'll never believe it's even valid. It's notarized, so your favorite son has no rights to Thomas. I'm still gonna get him taken away from you. They want the baby. And then Alvin finally realized that the whole baby plan was the mother's idea. Brian may not have been aware of it at all. It was obvious that his family was in big trouble, and his mother couldn't miss such a fat lot. Mom, do they even want him? Have you asked their opinion? Brian knows he's not very excited about the prospect. He doesn't want kids, but his wife has started the adoption papers. Thomas is perfect for them. He's not some homeless kid with alcoholic genes. Your Lisa isn't the best choice either, but it's a choice. Alvin was so horrified by what he heard that he sat down on the bench with his arms around his head. Mom, can you hear yourself? People are not puppets. You can't control the fate of living people like that. Thomas is just a child. Have you thought about him? He has loving parents. You want to take him away from us? Put him through a lot of stress. Then you're going to give him away to people who don't really want him. I'm not talking about you destroying our family, breaking the law dozens of times and wasting a lot of money and nerves. Is it really worth it? Let your brother and his wife take a child from an orphanage. Their children live for years without parental affection and love, but be happy that at least one will break out of this system and get into a family. I didn't breed these puppies to regret and bring them up. You were enough for me, although I probably should have put you in a shelter too. Maybe they would have made a human out of you. For the first time in his life, Alvin realized how much of a monster his mother was, indifferent, cynical, and mean, and he was still trying to get his wife to get in touch with her. He should have broken off the relationship long ago, but he hoped in his heart that she would love him and be proud of him. When Betty was born, he had hoped that the arrival of a little granddaughter would soften the grandmother's heart. How wrong he had been. Her suspicions that Lisa had fattened up her daughter were only a screen. In fact, his mother was simply impossible to please, except for the adored eldest son. She loved no one and never loved. Mom, I don't want to discuss this with you anymore, but I'm warning you, if you mess with my family, hold on, I'll forget that you and I are related. My son and my daughter are more related to me, and I will protect them from you in every way I can. The man went home with his head down. He could not believe that from this day begins one of the most difficult periods in his life. He had no doubt that his mother would not rest. He had to prepare, to think about every little detail. He and Lisa needed to build a strong wall to defend themselves against an enemy like his mother. When he entered the apartment, his wife was still sitting on the floor in front of the door, devastated, unable to cry. Alvin picked her up and helped her to the couch to comfort her. He rocked her in his arms for a long time like a small child until she fell asleep. In that moment, he decided that he would protect this woman from any evil, even if it came in the form of his own mother. Brian had been in a bad mood since the morning. Things were not going well at work, and his father-in-law considered him to be the one to blame. For several years, the man had been trying to get out of his skin to prove that he was not just the husband of the daughter of the head of the company, but also an excellent specialist. In addition, it was necessary to maintain the image of an ideal family man, and in a marriage of convenience, it becomes difficult, if not unbearable, even in the first years of marriage. And his wife, with her fantasies and unrealizable ideas, decided to become a volunteer. Not enough headaches for him and his mother, but this. He quickly realized that the only way to get anywhere in this life was to go around. Flattery and family ties were a pretty good option. When Brian learned that the CEO had a daughter, he quickly figured out the surest way to the top managers of the company. Pretty but shallow Kathy quickly fell for a beautiful courtship from Daddy's subordinate at one of the corporate events. Brian knew how to please a woman and successfully went to fulfill the plan. After a month, spoiled girl was ready, as they say, to eat out of his hands, and after another month, Brian and Kathy married. To consolidate the success of the young man, put up a lot of work to show the future father-in-law that he is worthy of becoming a member of the family. However, the new relative was in no hurry to entrust his son-in-law with any important position. The spectacular and well-groomed woman had only one flaw, which annoyed Brian terribly. She very much wanted to have children, and despite all her efforts, it was this whim she could not fulfill. "Darling, you're still so young. Why would you want to ruin your figure by getting pregnant at your age? Let me buy you some fancy dog or some other stylish animal, and you will take care of it. And the baby, it's screaming snot. Why would you do that? Hire a trendy nanny? No nannies. I'm gonna raise our child myself. In case you forgot, I'm a certified child psychologist. I know how much that degree cost your dad." Brian thought to himself, but he said out loud, "I don't doubt your pedagogical talent, but I think that we can have children later, by 35, 40 years. Are you crazy? The older the mother, the more likely she is to give birth to an abnormal child. Are you ready to take on the responsibility of having a child like that?" I wasn't planning on taking responsibility for the baby at all. The young husband thought, but out loud he said, "Honey, we can't have a sick child. We are both healthy and carefully monitor our condition." Since the day of the gorgeous wedding, only about a year had passed, and the young husband had already been seen in the company of a spectacular beauty, then another and another. While Kathy underwent one examination after another, her loving husband actively built up her horns. Finally, patience broke, and he sent the young family abroad. The motivation was more than worthy. Examinations with the best specialists, and Brian offered to head one of the European offices. The position he dreamed of so much, in fact, turned out to be a sham. The head did not have the right to vote, could not sign documents, and on all important issues was obliged to consult with his deputy, in fact, the head of the office. The young woman's father could easily destroy his son-in-law, tell his daughter about all his connections on the side. However, he raised her alone. His wife passed away when little Kathy was not even 3 years old. In an attempt to replace mom and dad, the man tried to shield his beloved child from all the misfortunes, to inform her that her hotly beloved husband does not love her and married her for the sake of calculation. The father did not have the strength and spirit. As soon as the hot blood of the ambitious young chief stirred, and he demanded an extension of authority, he was provided with proof of his dissolute metropolitan life. Recognize it. There are at least 5 different girls here, 2 of whom are not socially responsible. Do you think your wife will appreciate this footage? I can prove it's a photo montage, and she can't leave me. Brian tried to be brave, but the shock of seeing the photo would be remembered for a long time. He could lose everything he had worked so hard for. Once subdued, Brian, even for a while, was deliberately attentive and kind to his wife, together with her, visiting endless examinations and taking a lot of tests. This strong desire of his wife to give birth to a child terribly annoyed Brian, who did not plan to burden his own life with such a nuisance. Screaming, stupid, always demanding attention to themselves creatures did not cause him a bit of tenderness or sympathy. He didn't plan to disrupt his life by having a child. Besides, he was not at all concerned about the proverbial glass of water in his old age. During his life, he planned to earn good money so that it would be enough for the glass and for a nurse who would bring it. And in general, he did not plan so far ahead. Everything in his life he managed without much difficulty. From childhood, he was accustomed to the fact that his appearance was already a happiness and a holiday. His mother was very fond of him. And with the appearance of her second son, she had a daily reason to praise one and humiliate the other. In time, Brian began to treat his brother as a servant. Limited and simple-minded Alvin was a toy in the hands of his brother, and his mother never tired to support Brian in his desire for wealth and luxury. And the other day, his mother shocked him with a completely unbelievable news. It turns out that she has figured out how to solve their problem with Kathy. At the moment when his mother solemnly announced her plan, Brian thought that she was completely out of her mind. Turns out one of his exes had a baby. He remembered that he had sent some knave fool to terminate the pregnancy, but she refused, and now the mother had decided to take the child away so that she and Kathy could adopt it. His lovely wife shared with her mother-in-law her desire to adopt the child. Then the mother very aptly remembered that 5 years ago, her son had shared a problem with her. A pregnant girlfriend had decided to give birth. Apparently, the mother followed that girlfriend, but Brian then began to have problems. His father-in-law exiled him and his wife abroad. They didn't come home even for his younger brother's wedding. His mother had talked them out of it then, saying the wedding wasn't worth their attention. So his mother decided to finish him off with some positive news. "Son, I haven't told you everything. You can adopt not some stranger's kid with strange genetics, but your own son. Are you all right in the head?" My son's voice became hard and rough. "You misunderstand me. I'm talking about the child that girl gave birth to with you. Remember you told me before you left that some girl was expecting a child from you and refused the money you gave her to get rid of it. And what? You're in touch with her. I would like not to communicate, but I can't." The woman exclaimed with hatred. "That sneaky little bitch is married to your brother. Are you kidding me? How is that possible? If I knew he seemed to run after her in his high school years, that he was in the army, and then they met again somewhere, and he continued to court her. She didn't really notice him in high school, but after she had a baby, I guess she wasn't so picky. The wedding was arranged quickly. She rather gave birth to his daughter, so that he did not run away." Enough of my brother's entertaining story of marital happiness. Let's get to the point. Well, they're raising your son now, and Alvin didn't even know Thomas was his nephew. I'm sure his wife didn't realize it either, because you two don't look anything alike. And the same last name didn't surprise her. I knew she had no brains even then. I think her dad was a drunk. Or it wasn't her. She married the first guy she saw so she could leave home with her fetus, and her father died a long time ago. Why are you telling me all this? Because your brother and his whore have another child. The older one can be taken away, and you and Kathy can adopt him. Mom, you make it sound like he's a kitten. Besides, why would I need such proof of my infidelity? My father-in-law would kill me. I'll help you. We'll take him away from them, put him in an orphanage, and from there you and your wife will take him and go abroad again. The mother was glowing with pride. It seemed to her that her plan was perfect because she tried so hard. All the effort she put into making her favorite son was happy. That day, he was able to convince his mother that the idea was as stupid as possible. In no case should not allow his wife to know that he went from her to the left. She naively believed him and thought that he sincerely loved her. It seemed that the mother calmed down for a while, but it was enough for only a week. As it turned out, all this time she spent on running around the organizations. In the competition, she's always so sweet and kind. Would those who knew her hear you? Brian muttered. Did you say something? Nothing, except that you look stunning tonight. You flatter her. Although the man did not have any tender and romantic feelings for his wife, he managed to imitate them skillfully, so that the wife lived in the happy certainty that she got the most loving, gentle, and attentive husband. For complete happiness, she lacked only a child. All doctors in one voice said that she is absolutely healthy and there are no contraindications for conception. It turned out that the husband had problems. However, after a year of infertile attempts, even he gave up and underwent a full examination. He, too, had nothing wrong with his health. The doctor said it happens. You just have to wait, distract yourself, and relax. Kathy couldn't relax. The baby gradually became an obsession. One day, scrolling through social networks, she came across a group in which adoptive parents shared details of their new life, a life in which there was a place for someone else's child, who became their own. In photos and videos, the frozen, withdrawn, emotionless babies gradually thawed, blossomed, began to smile, and became ordinary in life joyful kids. That day, she wasn't too keen on the idea of adoption because she and her husband were young and healthy. It required a little waiting, as the doctor said, but something kept the woman going to that group every day. She had gotten to know many of the babies and could appreciate their progress. And then one day she heard the story of one of the moms who had been pregnant for a long time, decided to adopt, and in the process of doing the paperwork, found out she was pregnant. Kathy digged through mountains of information regarding this phenomenon because, as it turned out, it was far from uncommon, and she saw this as a way out. Besides 2 children, that's twice the joy. Even if she could not give birth to her own, she would have an adopted baby who would also need a family, care, affection, and supportive parents. She decided to share her thoughts with her husband, and he did not appreciate her enthusiasm. If on a blood child he was still ready to agree, then on not native, adopted, he could not decide under any conditions. Unexpectedly sharply, Kathy's father also spoke out on this matter. He also saw it as another whim of his daughter. Baby, you will play. You will quickly get bored with studying, wasting time on someone else's child. You will not find in him your traits, the traits of a husband. He'll yell, you'll be tired, and eventually you'll want him back. It's not all rosy on this issue. For every happy foster family, there are 5, if not 10 unhappy ones who regret their decision. You're wrong. I'm being realistic. I don't plan on taking in a child with a disability, but that's only for the reason that you all would be against it. My abilities are sufficient for that. Daughter, as a child, you couldn't even take care of a cat properly. Your endless pets we didn't have time to buy. I understand. You want a child, but it's more like a whim that was not fulfilled, and you stubborn. Admit it to yourself. A baby is not a doll or hamster. You can't take it and play with it and put it back in the shelter. I won't allow it. Okay, then I'll volunteer at the orphanage practice. Are you crazy? If you've got nothing better to do, go to work. Do you want me to get you a job at my firm? Dad, I've been working there for a long time. Have you forgotten? That's right. So come out and start your duties. I'll use the money I earn to buy diapers and formula for the kids. Her husband and father, accustomed to see in her only a charming doll, not endowed with a rich intellect, did not expect such persistence. The woman really decided to test her willpower for strength. She found an organization which, on a gratuitous basis, cooperated with the baby house. Volunteers, mostly young boys and girls, not only helped by collecting necessary supplies, food, but also often on duty with the nurses. They helped to bathe and change the babies who were left without their mothers or just carried them in their arms. Kathy decided to come in the evenings and read stories to the babies. Even though they were the youngest babies on the ward, she knew how important this bedtime ritual was. She herself did not remember her mother well, but she remembered well that she read to her every day. One day, on her way back from her new duty, she decided to walk, and on a bench near the house, she saw a woman with her children. A boy and a girl about 5 and 3 years old, so cute and adorable. They were telling their mother about the events that happened to them in kindergarten, and the mother listened to them attentively, asking questions. Kathy was also admiring the picture, stopping nearby. She liked this family so much that she decided to go over and meet them. She didn't usually do that, but here some sort of mental impulse kicked in. "Hello. I couldn't pass by without admiring you. What a beautiful family you are." The children hid behind their mother, unaccustomed to such attention from strangers. "Oh, I frightened you. I'm sorry." "It's okay. They're just very modest." The children's mom was about the same age as Kathy, and I could already have children of that age. Sad, the woman thought, and said out loud, "My name is Kathy. I'm a volunteer at the orphanage. I thought I'd take a little walk and I met you. I'm Lisa." "And I'm Thomas." The boy had the courage to introduce himself. Beautiful dark hair, blue-eyed boy reminded her of someone very familiar, but she could not remember who. Having a pretty good memory for faces, the woman didn't remember names, and it always took her a long time to remember how she knew this or that random person. However, now there was a completely different feeling about the boy. She had definitely never met him anywhere, but his features were familiar to her. As she briefly thought about it, a dad approached the family, and Kathy realized who she was reminded of by the little boy. It was Alvin, her husband's brother. She couldn't understand why the brothers had stopped talking years ago. She had never met him in person. When she and Brian had married, Alvin had been in the army, and then they had gone overseas and had only recently returned. In all that time, she had only seen her husband's brother in pictures and knew nothing about his family at all. When she and her husband visited his parents, the topic of her younger brother's family was carefully avoided. What was wrong with them? The woman thought, beautiful, young, friendly family, beautiful children. Why did her mother-in-law, who had always been so kind to her, never mention her grandchildren? Alvin and his wife did not realize who was in front of them. Even if they had seen her in a photo with her husband, they would hardly recognize her now, without makeup and styling, modestly dressed. At that moment the phone rang, and Kathy waved goodbye to her new acquaintances. She stepped back to the playground. It was her husband. "Baby, where have you been?" "You're not picking up. I'm worried. Is something wrong?" "I turned off my phone while I was putting the kids to bed. Nothing happened." "Listen, where are you now?" "I'm at work." "I'm gonna be late today. What are your plans for me?" My husband's voice has become quieter and more mysterious. "Yes, I was going to ask you to go out tonight." "Yes," disappointedly stretched the husband. "And I was hoping to spend time alone. Who are you going to see?" "Do I know them?" "I think you do." "It's your brother's family." "No, Brian didn't have time to think before he blurted out the answer. Why not? Kathy was embarrassed by such a quick and abrupt answer. I just saw them. They have such adorable kids. The boy looks just like you. Why would he look like me? Brian realized that his voice might give him away. It was hysterical. He realized that his wife had found out, and why had she come to the orphanage? It was high time to correct her brains and stop this circus with adoption. He did not need children, neither his own, nor even strangers. Why should he? You're his own uncle. Brian breathed a sigh of relief. She doesn't know anything. Did my mother call you today? He asked cautiously, for fear of hearing that she had already told her daughter-in-law about the wonderful idea of adopting a boy who looked remarkably like Brain. Now that scheme, thankfully, could be forgotten. The wife had seen Thomas, which meant she would guess everything. No, should she? Why don't we stop by her place tonight? It's been a while. Kathy was genuinely surprised at the reluctance of her husband's relatives to socialize. Listen, I've got a great idea. Let's have a big family dinner tomorrow. Invite Dad, your parents and your brother, and his family. I mean, we've never met them. It's kind of weird, don't you think? You're brothers, but you haven't seen each other in years. Lisa and I met for the first time today, and we've been related for years. I would love to hang out with your nephews. Thomas is a very handsome boy, and his little sister is adorable. I didn't even get a chance to ask her name. Betty. Her mother says she looks nothing like her brother. Brian noted absently, frantically trying to steer his wife's thoughts in another direction and distract her from the wonderful idea of having her mother, father-in-law, and ex-mistress with an illegitimate child at the same table. Even an eel in a hot frying pan would have a better chance of surviving than him. Yeah, she's a carbon copy of Mommy. Lisa, by the way, is a very beautiful young woman. I would never have guessed she'd have such grown-up kids at such a young age. How old is she? Your age? Baby, I missed you so much. Why don't we just spend the evening together? It's been so long since we've been out. You don't want me to meet your relatives? His wife asked him directly. His mother and his brother's wife have a very strained relationship, and she has never accepted his choice. In addition, the mother is not sure that the daughter to the brother is a relative. Anyway, it's a whole story, and I don't want to involve you and your father in it. He doesn't seem to like me enough as it is. What makes you say that? Dad, on the contrary, is always praising you. But it's one thing to praise you, but it's another to put you in a position of responsibility. You didn't answer, by the way. When are you coming home? Why do I send a driver to pick you up? Okay, I'm waiting. Kathy replied. Again obeying the momentary impulse, Kathy decided to approach her husband's brother's family one more time and get acquainted. The children were still walking in the playground. The parents were sitting on a bench and discussing something very heatedly. Coming closer, the woman heard a phrase. They won't be able to do that. It's not easy to take away a child. Who could think of such a horror, to take children away from their parents? It flashed through my mind. Hello again. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. I got distracted by the phone call. Good evening. Alvin and Lisa said the same thing. Not quite sure what this woman wanted from them. I'm Kathy, your brother Brian's wife. The woman decided to introduce herself at once. An equally frightened, angry expression appeared on the couple's faces. They looked at each other and practically said in one voice, "You can't take him away. We won't let you." Then the woman rushed to the playground to get the children, and Alvin turned to the uncomprehending Kathy and repeated, "Thomas, we're not giving him to you. He's our son, no matter what his mother does. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you talking like that? I'm not going to take anyone away from you. I just recognized you and wanted to invite you to visit, to get to know you. We're close relatives, but we've never met in person, so it's strange to me. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to get to know you. I have no ill intentions, I swear to you. Apparently, the woman spoke very convincingly. Alvin looked at his wife and said, the ingenious plan was apparently hidden from her, and suggested, turning to his brother's wife, come on, we'll tell you why we don't communicate with our parents and brother. Surprisingly, the problems brought Alvin and Lisa closer together. He stopped being jealous of her, and she felt great support from her husband. They were now a real family of friends. The conversation took all evening. While Lisa changed clothes and fed the babies, Alvin and Kathy sat in the kitchen. Then her spouse turned on cartoons and joined them. Kathy was horrified by what she heard. Her whole ideal world turned out to be a jumble of lies. Her husband had been lying to her for years, constantly mentoring the enemy, and her mother-in-law, she didn't even want to think about her. Wow, how lucky she was to be stopping near their house today. Despite the horror of the story, she had no reason not to believe it. There was too much evidence, but what struck her most was her mother-in-law's cynicism. She was going to force Kathy to raise a child who had been born to her husband by his mistress. Under the icing of her and Brian's marital happiness, she was going to hide so many broken destinies. She looked at the children who were watching cartoons passionately. Thomas had her husband's profile, his eyes, his hair, the shape of his head. It was amazing how a child could look like a father who had absolutely no use for him. Several times her husband tried to call her. She dropped the calls, and then she turned off the phone altogether. She didn't want to see or hear from anyone, but it was scary to be alone right now. Then she had an idea. Guys, can I stay at your place tonight? I can't go home and I don't want to go to my dad's. Of course you can stay. You are the only ones who told me the whole truth, and we are not strangers now. We have so many secrets in common. The woman smiled sadly and went out to the balcony. She wanted to breathe a little and put her thoughts in order. At that moment there was a knock on the door, or rather, almost knocked it off its hinges. The knocker seemed determined to kick it down. Alvin looked through the peephole and saw his angry brother on the stairs. He opened the door and stepped out, preventing Brian from entering the apartment. Are you crazy to knock like that? We have little kids sleeping. Where's my wife? Brian was clearly concerned. The driver reported that Kathy wasn't at the address, which meant only one thing: she had gone to talk to his brother. The fact that she hadn't picked up the phone in hours only confirmed the hunch. Brian called her father and a couple of friends just in case. She was nowhere to be found, and no one had seen her. After getting her mother's address from her brother, Brian rushed to get his wife. Realizing that today was most likely the last day of his married life, his career and everything that surrounded him, his apartment, his car, his vacation, he had it all only because of his wife. Strangely, he felt no regret now. Lies like a huge layer of snow pressed on him, not allowing him to live normally. Now it would crumble, and what would be left behind was to be seen. We have her, but you better not see her right now. Does she know everything? What does she know? Everything. My brother just said it, and then he went on. That you've been going out on the road. About Thomas being your son. That Mom decided to take him away from us and give him to you. Why did you tell her that? There was no anger in Brian's voice, just a terrible tiredness. Don't you think she deserved it? She really loves you, and she wanted a child from you, not for her own whims. Why are you doing this to her? Why are you all doing this to her? I too, under my mom's influence, didn't notice how hard it was for Lisa all those years, and she put up with it. Do you know what she's been through? I'm glad my mom came up with that horrible adoption plan. It brought us closer together. If you love your wife, fight for her. Apologize, beg, plead. But if you only want her as a means to an end, don't ever go near her again. She's strong. She'll be hurt, painful, sad, but she'll get through it. How do you know all this? You don't know her. You don't know her. We've learned more in a few hours than you have in 7 years. I want to talk to her. She doesn't want to. She's staying with us tonight. If she's ready tomorrow, I'll call you. Does Thomas really look like me? Yes, but if you try to take him away from me or tell me the truth, I'll wipe you out. From the calm confidence with which his brother said those words, Brian realized his mother's plan was doomed to failure beforehand. His brother had become to the boy the best father imaginable. He even felt a pang of jealousy. His son would grow up in front of him with no way of knowing the truth. We reissued the deed to him. Thomas is my son now. I don't even recommend genetic testing. It won't help you. I was initially against the idea that the mother came up with. She seems to have serious problems with her head. I'd show her to a specialist, then show her. I don't want to cross paths with her anymore. With my father, yes, he was very happy when he visited us the other day. He finally met his grandchildren. But she doesn't exist for us anymore. Lisa, she ruined her life for many years, and I was considered an empty place from birth. We have not lost anything. On the contrary, we have gained. My father dared to go against her. If you want, you can come sometimes, but I warn you, if you make any mention of who you are to Thomas. I'm his uncle, and I'm not going to pretend to be anything more than that. That's fine. Apparently, there really is a freak in the family, and it's obviously not you. For the first time in his life, Brian didn't want to be haughty and arrogant with his brother. He suddenly felt jealous. A loving wife, children, a cozy home, even his wife found shelter and comfort here, and he seemed to be his own brother. There was no place here, too wide. Deep gulfs separated them. I'll try to talk to her. Alvin seemed to read his brother's mind. But you shouldn't see each other right now. You should also think hard today about what to do next. Obviously, it won't be like before, but if you don't need her, and you're with her for the money and her father's opportunity, at least be honest with her. You'll be able to achieve everything in life without her father and position. The last phrase my brother said was more for encouragement, but it was the one that echoed in my head all evening and all night. In the morning, Kathy left for a friend's house in the country, not telling anyone but Alvin and Lisa where she was. Her parents had to work late that day, and the children were to be picked up from daycare by their grandmother. Cheerfully pacing the path, the children and Grandma recalled the day's events, shared news, joked and laughed. The second grandmother grew in their path quite unexpectedly. Roughly grabbing the boy by the hand, she tore him to himself, trying to unhook his other hand from his grandmother. "Come here. So let the boy go. He should be somewhere else by now." The woman didn't look very decent, to say the least. "What are you doing?" "Let Thomas go." Lisa's mother began to look around frantically for help. They were only a few meters away from the entrance. At that moment, she saw a woman sitting on a bench in the playground and decided to call for help. "Help! This is crazy. She wants to take the child away." The woman turned in their direction and, as if recognizing her, quickly ran towards them. However, Alvin's mother, upon seeing the woman, quickly changed her expression. "Kathy, daughter, what are you doing here, my good girl? Brain can't find you for 24 hours. Aunt Kathy, you're back. Stay with us again tonight. It's so much fun with you. Hugging the children, unhooking her mother-in-law's hand from the boy's arm, Kathy turned to her husband's relative. And she won't. I filed the divorce papers, packed his things, already took them to your apartment. Your husband didn't even bother to ask what the reason was. What papers? Honey, what kind of joke is this? You two love each other so much. Yes, I did, but your son, the feeling is completely foreign. You don't have to talk to me. I know everything about Brian having a child. The woman looked expressively at the boy, who stood between the two grandmothers and could not understand what was going on. And about the rest of his exploits. It's all of them. It's my no-good Alvin and his philandering wife. They're the ones who turned you against me, against Brian. I'll give it to them. I'll have them on their knees. After these words, the woman suddenly made a terrible grimace, clutched to her heart, and fell down. After a heart attack that left the woman bedridden for almost a year, Alvin and Brian's mother never returned home. She was transferred to a specialized facility with signs of mental illness. Amidst the intense stress, the main factor that affected her mental health was the breakup of her eldest son's family. The former daughter-in-law became a friend for the family of the younger one. She continued to help volunteers, worked as a child psychologist. It was this work that gave her everything she had dreamed of, a loving and loving husband and a little daughter.
Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Soon your station will be here, and through the door of my compartment the conductor announced, 10 minutes to go. Thank you, my good man. I picked up my valise and down the narrow corridor. While reading, sitting on the joints of the rails of the carriage, headed for the exit. The train slowed down. It jerked several times and finally, shrilly, with the wheels locking, came to a stop. The conductor wiped the handrails and helped me down the steep steps to the platform. The steam locomotive blew its whistle and the train shuddered. As you sang, an optical seizure began to slowly gain speed. Soon the last carriage disappeared around the corner. The clatter of the wheels ceased to be heard, and there was silence. I looked around. A small station, or rather, a half station, a wooden, in some places rotten platform, and a forest all around. I took out my watch and opened the lid. A quiet tune played. The time had long since passed 12 o'clock, and it was appropriate to think that evening would soon be upon us. I headed towards a small structure. Apparently, the station keeper's cabin. The door was locked. Everything about it said that trains rarely stopped here, and that the station master's position had long since been abolished for lack of use. I looked around, still not a soul in sight. To be honest, I felt a little creepy to be alone in an unfamiliar place. It was a rather dubious pleasure on the eve of evening. I walked around the cabin and saw an old inn going into the woods. Is there nothing to do? We must go. According to my calculations, the homestead should be somewhere about 5 kilometers from the railroad. After all, I have a revolver with me, and I'm not afraid of the nocturnal evil. I crossed myself and headed confidently toward the road, hitting the railroad embankment before heading deep into the woods. I stopped and pulled the revolver out of my valise, cranked the drum, checking the cartridges, and slipped the weapon behind my belt under my jacket. Well, can we go now? The inn was old, and it was obvious that it was rarely used. To the right and left grew tall mossy, spruce trees with their paws. There were pine trees all the way to the ground, but mostly I was surrounded by melnick. Elderberry bushes grew along the roadside, covered with bright red full berries. For some reason I remembered how as boys we used to spit unripe green berries through tubes, getting unimaginable pleasure from it. I imagined myself now with a buzina in my mouth, and it made me laugh. The road was mostly dry, but somewhere there were puddles, in some places quite large and deep. Sometimes there were boulders, brought here by the Olenek. They were neatly placed on the roadside so as not to interfere with the passage. I looked under my feet for signs of hoofprints and wheels. There was no cart in sight. I walked not fast, swaying my valise in time with the movement of the evening. The sun was slowly but inevitably retreating behind the trees. The pace was getting darker and there was no end of the road in sight. I began to look around for a place to stay for the night. I was born into a poor family. My parents were once serfs of the Wyazemski princes. My mother was brought up by the Baron and was brought up in the best noble traditions. In time, the Baron himself laid his eyes on her, but his wife was vigilant, and as soon as she saw his sympathy, immediately sold my future mother to a neighbor, and the latter married her to his coachman Kevin. And that's how my mother became Marlo Slaw. Being a woman of purpose and firm character, she managed to re-educate her husband, my father, taught him literacy, and made him study. After liberation, my father engaged in selling hemp and pine resin for his wife's dowry, and with his savings he leased a large plot of forest, which once belonged to the same princes Wyazemski. Gradually the trade began to bear fruit. My father became a millionaire and owned several cargo steamships on the Dnieper. We had a big house outside the city and a large apartment in St. Petersburg. I was the only child in the family, and my mother, a former serf, prepared me for university. But I wanted to be in the military. By that time, the rules for entering a military school had been liberalized, and they started accepting non-oblomen. My father paid the right people, and for 2.5 years I became a junker at the Vilna Cavalry School. After graduation, I was sent in the rank of lieutenant to the Smith Hussar Regiment, which was going to the Caucasus. Well, in fact, do not send to war scion of a noble family, such served only in the guards. In the first battle at the storming of the fortified Al-Zatik, I was wounded. I spent a long time in the hospital until I was dismissed from the army. But I had no sooner returned home, as I was summoned to one institution and offered to serve as an official. I must say that the new service did not interfere at all with my commercial activities. By the time I returned from the army, the Wyazemski princes were completely impoverished. The Baron's son Christopher started to trade, but quickly went bankrupt and mortgaged even the estate. His sister Lisa sat in her father's estate and, it seems, was preparing to become an old diva. There were no hunters for the young lady. Our house was not far from the prince's nest, and one evening, returning from hunting, I happened to see the young princess. I saw her and fell in love. I didn't chew the snot for a long time. A month later, I sent the matchmakers. You should have seen the old Baron and his son. They seemed to burst with anger, if only a former slave, to marry their daughter. The blue blood even boiled. I was about to be chased away, but my father politely explained to the food gentleman that he would give a course to their bills of exchange, and if they did not pay their debts, the estate would come to me. This is a matter for zealous princes. The end of the debate was put by the princess. She, paying no attention to the relatives, gave her consent to marry me, knowing perfectly well that she was losing her title and nobility. A month later, we were married in a small church. A month later, I took my young wife and left for the capital of the empire. Now, allow me to introduce myself. Marlo Stephen. I'm a salesman of all kinds of collections. Yes, that's my specialty. You might also call me an antiques dealer, but that's a bit of a stretch. I search for, buy out collections that have already been collected by someone, and then sell them to amateurs. Expertise, evaluation is all mine. Understandably, I try to buy cheaper and sell more expensive. The difference is my income, but I always try to give a real price. Cheating is not my thing. Collections, any postcards, paintings, watches antique and not antique bronze, cast iron, musical instruments, bells, anything a person can be passionate about and collect. Believe me, there are some very unusual collections. For example, a collection of feathers. It would seem a trifle. What could be interesting in it? Not at all. I recently sold such a collection to a St. Petersburg object for very decent money. Or, for example, a collection of ships' helms and bells. I bought it from the widow of an old captain and sold it very profitably to a collector. He even almost fainted from happiness, so the money was not spared. I'm not talking about the gun collection. It's a gold mine, but I don't collect them myself. For me, it's only a trade item to be in the subject. I have to read scientific books and magazines, understand the types of iron casting, know the composition of ancient enamels and paints, be able to distinguish the original from the fake, sometimes very skillful. Some sellers go to all sorts of tricks and stratagems to sell their things more expensive, so you have to keep your eyes open. That night was no different from any other. Summer was fading, but it was still quite warm. Soon the cottagers would be back in town from their vacation, and my trade would be revitalized. I sat in front of the fireplace and smoked a cigar. I was leafing through a recent catalog from a Leipzig auction. As a rule, nothing of interest came up at these auctions, so a couple or three old canvases by unknown artists, some porcelain, and a covered green damsel, bronze. Complete collections of the subject of my commercial interest rarely pop up at these kinds of auctions. But this time I was interested in a small selection of jewelry, a few rings, necklaces, a couple of bracelets, white gold, and precious stones. In general, I do not like to fight at an auction, raising the bid to infinity. Generally, things are auctioned off to maximize profit. I don't know why I paid attention to the jeweler. I put aside the catalog and took the Jeller's handbook off the shelf. On antique jewelry and articles is very often found branding with the assay, an ancient Russian measure of weight equal to 1/6 of a pound. The gold or silver content of an alloy is determined by the amount of Zlotnikov maximum 96. For example, 50. A 6 gold assay means that there are 56 parts of gold and 96 parts of the alloy. The remaining 40 additives, the so-called literature. Thus, pure metal without any impurities corresponded to 96 gold pieces of gold, 24 carats. It should be said that the presence of gold in the alloy forms the price of the product, plus the work of the craftsman and so on. It's a bit boring, of course, but agree, valuable information, and for lovers of antiques, and for specialists. So all the products presented in the catalog were 92 OU sample, which in itself was unusual. Budget jeweler is usually not higher. The 56th grading had salt in the fireplace at night, and soon I dozed off with a book dropped in my lap. I dreamed of the goldsmith, new samples, and a roundel round my head. I was awakened by a knock at the door. On the threshold stood a rather decently dressed gentleman with an expensive English cane hanging from the curve of his left arm. The man inclined his head politely and asked if I could see Mr. Marlowe. "What can I do for you?" I replied politely. "We could talk." The man nodded toward the open door. "If you mean business, I don't do business at home. Come by the store tomorrow." I was about to close the door, but the man stopped it with the toe of his lacquered shoe. "Believe me, Mr. Marlowe, what I'm about to tell you will interest you." The man looked me straight in the face, and there was something in his eyes that made me shy away. Letting him into the apartment, we went into the hall, and I nodded to the visitor on a vacant chair. "Would you like a cognac or a cigar?" I tried my best to hide my irritation. "Thank you. Let's get down to business." The stranger sat down in the chair, leaning against its arm. "Allow me to introduce myself. Sam, Mr. Marlowe. I collect unusual sculptures. The means allow me to do so. They're not made of porcelain or metal. The object of my passion is human figures made of other materials, wax. For example, only wax can fully convey the beauty of the human body. All the more so now wax figures are becoming fashionable. But alas, wax figures do not last long. Even a simple change in air temperature can, if not destroy the figure, but to cause its noticeable damage. That's not the case with wood. Wooden sculptures can only be destroyed by fire, and if a wooden sculpture is properly treated, it can last forever. The stranger's eyes gleamed, reflecting the fire of the fireplace. "Do you want to sell me your collection?" I asked, blowing smoke out of my mouth. No, I want to offer you to find something for me. What do you mean? My question sounded a little uncertain. I want to ask you to visit Mr. Williams, or rather his estate. The fact is, the owner of the manor died recently, but I have information that he had a large collection of sculptures. There's no mention of it after his death, but it can't have just disappeared. You have to find it. I'll pay you good money. I could hear the excitement in the guest's voice. He was about to say something else. Lisa, my wife and assistant, entered the room. Sorry, darling. I didn't know you were busy. She smiled sweetly. Maybe bring an appetizer. Lisa nodded at the decanter of brandy. I looked questioningly at my guest. He smiled and shook his head negatively. Thank you, dear. We'll be done soon. I did not introduce the guest to my wife. Lisa tilted her head, letting me know that she understood me, and quickly left the living room. Where do you think this manor is located? I returned to the conversation. And what makes you think the collection still exists? I don't. I know. I was in Switzerland recently and saw a little girl's figure carved out of wood. It's from the Russians' collection. He was the only one who had figures like this. He showed me some in his St. Petersburg apartment. So you two know each other. I put the smoking cigar butt in the crystal ashtray. Yes, casually. We crossed paths at an auction in Berlin. A year ago, he recognized me as a fellow countryman and invited me to visit his apartment in St. Petersburg. I took him up on that offer and stopped by. I fell in love with his collection. According to him, the main part of the collection is in his estate. It's about 100 kilometers along the Northwest Railroad. The manor is also called Elnik. The guest was rubbing his hands together with excitement. He asked the Russian if there were any hairs left or not. I took out a notebook. I don't know. According to him, he had a sister. She was living in this estate at the time. According to the Russian, she's a little out of sorts, shuns people, and doesn't like to socialize with them. She is a recluse. She is most likely the primary heir. We need to find the manor, check if there is a collection there, and persuade the sister to sell it. You can set the price. I'll do anything. The man was even freezing in his chair from excitement. In front of me lay the ancient city of Casimir, dissolved in the haze. Or rather, what was left of it. I walked north for almost half a day through this ancient land. High hills sometimes, and dense forest now breathed. We know. I stood at the top of the tower and looked out at the thick new thickets outlining the tower and the ruins of the ancient city. In the distance, almost at the very horizon, I could see multicolored strips of already compressed fields, rye and wheat, orphaned by the wide stream leisurely carrying its waters. I cautiously descended to the ground and walked on a road not traveled in a long time. The day was coming to an end, and the heat was slowly beginning to subside in the grass. The grasshoppers awoke, and soon the air was filled with their cheerful rolling. Behind me, I heard the squeak of wheels, and the whole not a horse. A cart surrounded by fresh hay was catching up with me. On the front sat a man overgrown, bearded to the ears, and lazily drove the horse to the oar, and carried a sledgehammer. Is it something in a language I don't know? He asked. I shrugged my shoulders, showing that I didn't understand anything. The man scratched his head, and after a bit of silence, said in pure Russian language, "Traveling baron." You can say so, I replied with interest, looking at the raven of local places, looking for the estate of Mr. Russian. There is one. It's about 20 versts away. You won't get there by nightfall. You'll have to spend the night somewhere. The man looked at me strangely. Are you a baptized cross-bearer yourself? Of course I'm baptized. I pulled out a silver cross on a leather lace from under my shirt. That's good. These places aren't well-to-do. It's better not to go at night. The charioteer crossed himself with some unfamiliar sign of the cross. Where can we sleep here? I asked. Is there an inn nearby, do you think? Just by Perrin's ferry crossing. The Armenians crossed the river during the party. It's not far from there. The man grinned. Sit down, sir. What's the use of beating your legs for nothing? He fucked Jim, and the horse trotted off. We passed the ruins of the city, and the road looped between the hills again. We rode in silence. The charioteer knew what he wanted and silently smoked a duck and an assad. I leaned back on the soft, fragrant hay and dozed off to the sound of the wheels. I woke up when the wheels stopped beating. The cart stood in front of a wide rubrail of ship's pine from the battle. Here was the charioteer squirming. He smiled broadly and waved his hand as if inviting me in. I got off the carts and the lull of the legs, and with interest began to look at the unusual shapes of the house, more like an ancient terem. I looked back at the massive iron-striped gate under a high frame. Just in front of them stood an ancient copper cannon aimed at the steamer. Strange. For what purpose? Inside we were greeted by a white, red-cheeked, and full of piles hostess. Smelled of hot samovar and bread. "Who is it you've brought?" "Charles." She smiled with a full mouth, scrutinizing me with a supple look. "Yes, here is the Baron of the Russian Manor looking for him. He won't get there before dark, so accept a stay until morning." I inclined my head politely. "Come in, sir." The hostess's voice became viscously sweet, like overripe honey. I looked around. There were several tables in the hall. 3 men in the corner were drinking tea from a samovar with 3 pieces of sugar. Over the table hung a lively chatter in an unfamiliar language. They paid not the slightest attention to me. I sat down at a table covered with snow-white tablecloth, nodded to my traveling companion. "I invite you to join the company." My companion, while with pleasure, took off the con mascara and nestled it on a nail hammered into the wall, and went to the counter to order tea and snacks for the table. It was almost dark, and kerosene lamps were burning in the hall, creating a mysterious twilight, chipped with shadows. Above our table, too, the kerosene lamp was lit, shining in the shui with a flower as round as a large margarita of fire. Soon the hostess brought a tall white teapot and 2 coolly perky Seraphan cups. Next on the wheat table, somehow by magic, there was a stock and a decanter. While about something, I looked around the room. The walls of the hall, at first glance, seemed to me extensive oak panels. But then I saw that they were perfectly matched pine logs. They were waxed and had a special amber color. Judging by the quality of the woodwork, it had been done skillfully and lovingly for centuries. I imagined for a second how much time and effort such quality work took. Right in front of me on the wall hung several ancient wooden shields with iron booms and leather plates. Most of them were covered with red and black paint already rubbed off. Between the shields on the carpets hung large and small axes, swords, muzzles, ancient daggers, and outlandish knives. Oh, and God knows what else. The soft thief of carpets emphasized the elegance of forms and the hidden strength of fatigue. All this household, despite its antiquity, was well cleaned and oiled. What struck me as a lover of antiquities was the excellent cachet of all these rarities. It seemed that swords, axes, had only yesterday been plucked out by the smith of the armorers. On the adjoining wall hung several unusual musical instruments, some very similar to guitar, others of exotic appearance, not like violins or some kind of snags with strings and bounces. A couple of bear skins and a few antlers weighed in. All in all, it all gave the hall an old cozy look. I even felt like I was somewhere in the 9th century instead of the last 1915. While I was looking around the room, on the table, on the tray was already lying minced meat and even duck covered with forbidden apples, dumping night jam nearby on a variety of plates and spoons. Salted mushrooms by the gun with garlic, boiled potatoes, and pate were frolicking. Almost transparent slices of ham were served separately. Wild boar, well smoked and cross-cut. As soon as Charles was seated at my table, the hostess brought out a dispersed charcuterie on a tray, in a large pewter shot glass, splashing some creepy liquid with the aroma of mint and something unfamiliar. "Try it, Baron." Charles smiled. "You've never had this before." I followed him and put the shot glass in my mouth. The liquid burned my gut for a moment. and was quickly confused by the elderly. Tears splashed from my eyes, but I restrained myself and did not blush. But as the hostess looked at me with curiosity, what is it only I could pronounce, translating the spirit brewed by an ancient recipe only for dear guests. The hostess nodded at the birch sap of 100 herbs, and the dishes kept arriving. On the table appeared clay, potted with pickled moose, lips in under vinegar, my large wooden bowl of sauerkraut and pickles. Finally, the hostess personally placed a tin bowl on the table on which thinly sliced pieces of pie lay in a neat mound, made by mega-important cookie brains. Charles filled the cooling shot glasses with vodka and proclaimed a toast. To be good to the court and alive for good luck. I didn't understand everything in this toast, but I dutifully drank. We had a snack, and Charles took out a tape about a raven, twisted a gypsy, and bought from a lamp. Satisfied, let out a line of smoke. And what is it alive? As if, by the way, I asked. You'll soon see for yourself, Charles grinned. We had been sitting for more than an hour when an old wolfish man with no arms entered the hall. Having signed a little at the entrance, he took down from the wall an instrument remotely resembling a violin. Soon a loud melody floated through the hall. It was unlike anything I'd heard before. Ragged rips, notes, squeaks, clouds, a sound that penetrated all the way to the heart. The music seemed like aliens from another world, of a world where non-humans ruled the ball. The melody lashed across the floor, then went up under the roof, striving to break free. Finally, it succeeded, and it soared into the starry sky, straight to the golden chariot, the serpent, the god, the foot that began its flight into the coming dawn. The ancient music, played in these parts for 1,000 years, awakened vague and unfamiliar images in my mind that I had not suspected an hour ago. The hostess brought out a large wooden bowl and poured milk. The old man stopped playing and quietly tapped the floor with his staff. Knock, 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 knock. He stood for a while and knocked again. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of some movement from the dark corners of the plate. Snakes slowly crawled to the plate in unmanned shadows. I shuddered involuntarily. The very sight of creeping of warring creatures gave me a primal terror. I was about to rush to the exit, but he intercepted me by the arm. I froze and, afraid to move, stared at the tangle of snakes near the plate of milk. Suddenly, I felt something cold and slippery crawling up my leg. The head of a snake appeared above the table. It froze motionless as if taking in, occasionally showing its twin tongues, then crawled onto my lap and then onto the table. It grabbed from my plate a piece of meat and immediately swallowed. Now everyone in the room, or our table. The snake looked at me for some time with a non-running look, and then also leisurely descended to the floor on my leg and crawled to the plate. About 20 minutes passed, and the snakes slowly began to spread to the corners. People started talking in the hall again, and servants started running around. I sat in shock, unable to say a word. At last he managed to pour a shot of vodka into my mouth. He seemed to be frightened and surprised himself when we more or less came to our senses. My traveling companion said, "I have lived a long time, but this is the first time I have seen such a thing." Charles shook his head at the idea of the living embracing a man. Suddenly the old man, still standing at the entrance, looked in our direction. "To my head here alive. And to whom are they feet?" he said in a suddenly thick bass, tapped his staff, and walked out the door. What did he say? I looked at my neighbor. "The Serpentine was born tonight," the king said Charles fearfully, and looked at his mistress with a long, expressive look. It was already night outside the window. When I stood in the gate, there was a knocking in the courtyard. Well, knocked. That's a weak word. In the gate nails or something heavy, with Hilda's throat open loudly. Even from where I was standing, I could see the landlady turn pale and shudder. She nodded, and one of her servants ran to open the gate. A moment later, the stomping of horses' hooves sounded in the courtyard, and several men came in through the swinging doors, though it was not cold outside. They were dressed in cloaks made of wolf skins, Wool on the outside. No weapons in sight, but long daggers were guessed under the squares. I knew that for local men a dagger is a mandatory attribute as a stone in the Caucasus. The newly arrived threw off their clothes and their arms under the running servants and sat down rankly at the free table on the benches. The hostess and the servants bustled around, arranging the utensils and dishes on the table. Soon the wine was sick in the parks, and the voices of the guests became louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the few visitors leaving the hall. Charles, too, disappeared as if vaporized. I, on the other hand, remained at my table. We ate the pie with pleasure and occasionally had a shot of vodka. Soon, I and later guests were left in the hall. The doors banged again, and a young lady entered the room. Her appearance was greeted with loud squawks. "Cindy, what's taking you so long?" They shouted for the hops and the young men. "Come and sit down with us." They quickly made room for their guest and moved her a wine glass. The maiden drained it in one fell swoop and looked curiously in my direction. I tried to ignore the merry company. I looked for my mistress with my eyes. "Going to go to bed?" "Pan, missus," sounded a melodious voice right above my ear. I looked up. Opposite my table stood a long-time maiden and smiled. "May I have a glass of wine with you?" She unceremoniously sat down on the bench. Across from me emerged from the darkness. The servant served her a full glass of red wine. I poured myself some vodka. The girl barely touched my shot glass with her glass and leisurely drained it to the bottom. I drank a little and put the shot glass on the table. "Pan is squeamish about drinking with me," quite loudly, unhappily said the maiden. He took me for a slutty girl. I already knew where this was going, and threw a quick glance at the opposite wall. Then I moved my valise toward me and opened it. My revolver was on the top of it, and it was a matter of seconds to get it out quickly. The room grew quiet. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement at a neighboring table and heard heavy footsteps. "Raven, that insolent, insulted me with a nasty voice," spelled the girl, hiding behind the broad back of her defender. "Pan knows what awaits him for insulting a lady." The scowling man spoke in a thick bass, putting his right hand on the hilt of his dagger. I involuntarily noticed the rings, thickly applied to his fingers. "Provincial ponce." I stand up. "Please forgive me if I have unwittingly offended you and yours. I've been here a long time, and I've had enough to drink. With your permission, I'm going to bed." I tried to speak peacefully, though I knew from experience that it would do little good in my situation. "Mr. Nobleman." The man spoke again. "No," I smirked. "That makes things easier. Now, I'll teach you how to talk to a lady. You're an asshole." Then he threw back the floor of his green lightweight captain's jacket and pulled out a whip from behind his girdle. I was still trying to dodge the contraction by appealing to the voice of reason, but in vain. The presence of an infantile Menka and hop in my head were doing their job. Pans decided to make fun of a stranger, to dispel, so to speak, boredom. "Well done." He swung, going to hit me in the face with the whip, but I took a step to the side and shoved the offender with the palm of my hand. He couldn't stay on his feet and fell on his ass. The girl kicked out of the table and two men came up and rushed toward me. But I was already pulling a sword with a ravenous, narrow blade from the wall. I didn't dance or make glamorous paw with my sword. I just rushed in front of the two men who were running towards me and struck one of them in the face with the blade. He stumbled and fell to the floor. I met the other with a blow of my right hand, holding the hilt, and I could hear the bones of his nose cracking. On my left, a small man with a weighty club in his hand rushed at me. I didn't like to start with him, lunged and punctured his arm. He howled and was no longer interested in me. Meanwhile, the maiden who had been lying continuously all this time helped the first one out of the door. That one snatched up a long dagger and, putting forward his right hand, rushed at me. I was busy with the servant and missed the moment. "Look out!" my mistress shouted to me, and I had time to turn around with a swift swing of my sword. The dagger fell from my assailant's hand. And then I was out of the way. A right straight punch to the jaw knocked the guy to the ground. I kicked him a few times, trying with the toe of my boot to mess up his face. If on the Grandee's Pawnee no longer ran, she sat silently, hammered in a corner, and watched the bloody fight with fear. Finally, the brawlers calmed down. 3 bodies lay motionless on the floor. The very first one was slightly underfoot. A servant sat by the column, clasping his bleeding hand with his hand. I stood motionless, holding the hilt of the sword in my palm. The light of the oil lamp reflected on its tip, gleaming predatorily. For a second, it seemed to me that death itself was dancing on my knee. Unforgiving and ruthless on the battlefield remained behind me. Thank you, Monsieur Lefort, for the lesson. Old Norman wrestling. That was very helpful. Not for nothing did I devote so much time to it at the Junkers School. Good blade, I said respectfully, and wiped the blade. And the white shirt to the servant then returned the weapon to its place. I turned to the hostess. She understood me without words and herself filled my glass with elm. I tipped the scalding drink into my mouth and picked up my valise. Carefully, I stepped over the pans that had fallen silent on the floor. Show me to my room. I turned to the landlady. She took the kerosene, a new lamp, and without saying anything went to the stairs leading to the second floor. The day began, as usual, with an all-consuming boredom. Putting on a robe after a nap, Lisa had a cup of coffee in the dining room. At that time, the clock struck 12. It was time to get ready for lunch. Lisa yawned, and with a bronze knife began to cut up the fancy French magazine delivered the night before. But no sooner had she cut the first page than the doorbell rang. A minute later, she was told that her brother Christopher and his companion had arrived. Without knowing why, Lisa was delighted at her brother's unexpected visit, especially with a mate after marrying Stephen. Brother and sister did not see each other often. Christopher avoided her husband in every way possible, considering it beneath his dignity to consort with some old box, especially since Stephen was not a nobleman and was clearly not fit for husband's Bukvayazemskaya. After the wedding, Lisa moved with her husband to the capital in his apartment. She felt that Stephen loved her. He pampered her in every possible way, bought expensive jewelry, dressed in the latest fashion, took her to theaters and galleries. Everything was fine at first sight, but it was only at first sight. Lisa caught on herself sympathetic, contemptuous looks of others. How could she, a born princess, sacrifice her nobility and title for the sake of her husband? Raznochensi, former serf. Not that it hurt her much, but still one had to admit it was unpleasant. And most of all, boredom. She didn't know what to do. She was going to study, but then she changed her mind. Lisa was educated. Her background gave her certain advantages. She had even graduated from the Smolny Institute, but it was difficult, if not impossible, for a woman to find a use for her talents in the empire. True, there was a way to give birth to Stephen children and take care of them. But something kept Lisa from taking that step, as if she were not quite finished. Surely she and Stephen would live together until they were old. Stephen had been gone for almost a week now, and Lisa did not know when her husband would return. She looked longingly at her watch and sighed heavily. Just then Christopher entered the living room. He was accompanied by a dapper young man dressed in a gray tee with a mustache. He was of the type that ladies like so much. Lisa noticed this at once and smiled to herself. "Hello, my soul." Christopher kissed his sister on the cheek. "Let me introduce you to my old friend Sebastian. He returned from London yesterday and is full of impressions. Sebastian, this is my sister Lisa." Christopher tilted his head. Sebastian took Lisa's outstretched palm with cold fingers and touched it lightly with his lips. "Where's your miser?" "Grandmother." "All with the old man." Christopher's voice was full of contempt. "Christopher, please." Lisa looked at her brother reproachfully. "Stephen has been away on business for a week." "That's fine. Sebastian invites us to the Mikhailovsky Theater. The French are doing Traviata tonight. But then to the Metropole restaurant. Sophia is singing there tonight with a gypsy choir. It's wonderful. It's so good. And then there will be some exotic dances only for our own people. The maid came in and began to set out the coffee utensils, but the guests categorically refused coffee, citing urgent business. Christopher promised to pick up the visa at 18 o'clock. That was the end of it. Lisa finally unfolded the magazine, but she couldn't read it. Sebastian's face loomed before her eyes. Lisa chased away the thought, inappropriate for a married woman. But she couldn't help herself. She knew one thing for sure. She liked Sebastian. The upcoming evening made her dizzy, and Lisa hummed to herself and began to try on her evening gown. The opera was wonderful. As always, was at the top of her game. The audience applauded for a long time and did not want to let her go after the performance. Lisa and her companions got into their own Sebastian carriage and went to the Metropole. By the time they arrived, the restaurant was full, but Sebastian had booked a table in advance. After a while, their company was joined by herself. She kissed Christopher playfully, gave Sebastian a friendly nod, and smiled at Lisa. Everything that was happening made her dizzy. It was a charming evening, and Sebastian seemed like a true English gentleman. "You have a very delicate nature," he whispered in Lisa's ear as he refilled her glass of red wine. Lisa was pleased by the young man's attention. She nodded and smiled at the corner of her lips. "Do you have such an expressive face, like in old Italian paintings?" The intrusive bow didn't stop. "Any artist would be happy to paint your portrait. Just a face." Unexpectedly, with coquettish Lisa, Sebastian was embarrassed for a moment, then began complimenting her with even more fervor. The gypsies sang and danced, and a young lady in bow came on stage. They held hands and froze in anticipation of the music. A guitar played and the dance began. The music was unusual, but extremely passionate. So was the dance. The partners moved quickly on the stage in a single impulse. It seemed that love and passion were about to engulf them both. The guitar played louder. It was joined by another music, then hushed, then played loudly. Finally, the partner surrendered and threw herself on her beau's arm. The hall exploded with applause. "What is the name of this dance?" Lisa asked with a gasp. "Tango." Sebastian replied condescendingly. "Soon it will conquer the whole of Europe." By the end of the evening, Lisa was already quite tipsy, and when Sebastian offered to see his collection of bronzes brought from England, she unexpectedly agreed. She was back in her familiar environment. She revolved among the nobility and bohemians, and therefore saw nothing criminal in going to see the collection of statuettes of a young man hitherto unknown to her, especially when accompanied by her brother and his companion. Sebastian lived in a spacious apartment in Schmidt's house, almost in the very center of St. Petersburg. They all sat for a while longer, drinking a bottle of old French wine. Then, after coffee, Christopher discreetly disappeared with his girlfriend into one of the rooms. The wine was drunk and the atmosphere cozy. Pushed to madness, Lisa never fully realized how she had ended up in Sebastian's bed, staring intently into his eyes. She gave herself without foreplay, and only when she felt him inside her. She remembered Stephen, but after a few sweet moments, she forgot again. Responding to his caresses, she sensed that Sebastian had a lot of experience with women. When he entered, she felt a hot warmth spill over her body. She felt so good with him that Lisa wanted nothing more. She wanted it to continue indefinitely. In the morning, remorse came over her. With her mind, she realized that she had cynically betrayed her husband that night. But she felt so good that she didn't want to leave her new acquaintance. Then Christopher appeared with his mistress, and they had fun again, forgetting everything. Several times Lisa caught a rather smirking grin from her brother. Lisa did not return home until the next day, consumed by passion. She had not even considered that Stephen might have returned. After a few years of quiet, measured life with her husband, Lisa felt happy and so desirable. She felt no particular remorse. "I just didn't know what to do next. Whether to end the relationship with Sebastian immediately or, on the contrary, to continue it. She did not consider the time spent in her lover's bed to be cheating. Lisa was not going to leave her husband. Well, regretted a little, not washed off. She continued to love Stephen and even wanted to have children with him. Or she did, but not with him. She was quite satisfied with a secure life with her husband, his calm, non-fanatical love. But Sebastian's heart was sweetly flooded and butterflies fluttered in her stomach. Sebastian, before going to bed, he would walk around the room completely naked for a while, giving Lisa the opportunity to admire his body, completely confident in its beauty. And then it was back to kissing, thrusting, and she would dive headfirst into the hot waves of pleasure. I woke up to a quiet knock at the door. "Get up," Baron heard the soft voice of the landlady. I jumped out of bed, noting the valise next to the bed. I opened it with a jerk and made sure that the revolver was still there. I dressed quickly and went downstairs to the hall. There were no traces of last night's battle. The floor was cleanly washed. There was breakfast on the corner table. I ate quickly and paid. I thought for a while and put a nickel on top. "For your trouble." When I kissed the hospitable hostess's hand and headed for the door, she called out to me, "Mr. Marlowe, do I have a present for you?" She picked up a cane standing in the corner and held it out to me. "It will be easier for you with it." I took a separate bronze-weighted stick and hung it on my arm. The hostess looked at me with a grin. Suddenly, I understood everything. With my hand, I touched the handle in the shape of Rosinu Snake's mouth and turned it gently. In a moment, a rather wide blade appeared in my hand, gleamed predatorily. In the light of the sunbeam, it was brought by my late husband, but he did not have time to use it. Tears glistened in the eyes of my hostess. "Have a safe journey. Take care. I'll pray for you." She kissed me on the cheek and baptized me with the sign of the cross. Charles was waiting for me in the yard, sitting on the front of the cart. He looked as if nothing had happened, smiled welcomingly at me smoking his duck. "It's time to go. Baron, we'll be there by lunchtime." Gray-haired Charles picked up the reins. I put my valise on the cart. The cart was lined with fresh hay, covered with a cloth-colored blanket. While I was getting settled, did the man make a face at the squeak? The wagon moved off. It was not so hot today. Soon the road slid into the woods, and it was even a little cooler. The fluffy business boughs formed a kind of pollock over the forest inn. The sun's rays hardly broke through the thick needles, and soon dusk enveloped the whole place. At one point, it seemed to me that once the train all the way to the ground spruce trees were about to close around us forever, shutting out the sun in my soul, slowly began to rise unrecognized, sitting in the very depths of consciousness, primal fear of the forest. I even cocked my head a few times, as if I wanted to ward it off. This obsession. Charles from the mountains, who had killed, sat on the front of the cart, and from time to time, as if reluctantly, drove the reins of the sadly coming horse. I lay down on the summer-smelling hay, putting my valise under my head, and watched the decayed and spruce trees slowly floating by. The cart bounced sharply. It hit a bump. The forest road narrowed noticeably. The paws of spruce trees were already clinging to the sides of the cart. Like the hands of ghouls, Charles smoked his stinking duck unperturbed. "This place is a death trap. All sorts of creatures." Suddenly he spoke. I looked around involuntarily. If there was a forest undead here before, it hasn't gone anywhere. So it lives among timid swamps and in thick, impenetrable roads. "There's a lot to see here." As if reading my thoughts, Charles said, "Don't take off your cross." I involuntarily fumbled for the silver cross hanging on a chain under my clothes. The cart ran on buds and roots protruding from the ground. Finally, we came to the edge of a rather large clearing. At its edge stood a large one-story wooden house surrounded by a metal fence. It had now slipped and fallen down in places. It was obvious that the estate was missing its owner's hand. There was a smell of smoke mixed with the odor of water. Well, here we are. This is the Russian's estate. It's not a nice place. Nothing but swamps. Charles crossed himself. "Goodbye, Baron. Maybe I'll see you again sometime." I took out some money to pay the freedman, but Charles shook his head negatively. He quickly turned the wagon around and the cart, bouncing on kidneys, disappeared into the woods. A moment later, the pitiful neighing of a horse reached me. The next morning, Sebastian sent Lisa a huge bouquet of red roses, and she couldn't resist. She spent the night in his arms again. The vicious liaison was addictive. Lisa spent almost all her evenings with her lover, almost always staying overnight. At some point, she realized it wasn't love. Lisa was sure she would not trade her husband for a lover. Every time she got into the carriage sent for her, Lisa convinced herself that it was the last time. But she couldn't help herself. So she went to see her lover again and again. What could you possibly have in common with this junk in your cheeks, kissing a young woman? Sebastian asked. This is a man not of our circle. Living with him will defame you and your family. Don't forget, you are a born princess Vyazemskaya. Stay with me, and I'll throw the whole world at your feet. You'll be what you should be again. Passion surrounded the head of Lise. I didn't feel like talking. She only pressed her lover's head more tightly to her breast, giving her whole body and soul to his caresses. A week passed from Stephen. There had been no news. Despite the adventures of love, Lisa's heart was troubled, and Sebastian was becoming more and more insistent. He was already jealous of her husband, and Christopher was adding fuel to the fire. What do you want? It's a good match. A rich, intelligent nobleman. Give up your miser, saber, and take your place in society again. He persisted in persuading his sister, take his money and move in with Sebastian. But it's indecent. Stephen is my husband. Lisa weakly resisted, realizing with her mind that there was a rational grain in her brother's proposal, especially since Sebastian is so sweet. But when her lover presented Lisa with a gold and diamond necklace, she trembled with her brother's help. Lisa opened the safe in her husband's office, took all the cash and bank-bearer bonds. With almost 5,000, she packed up her belongings and moved in with Sebastian. Not a week had passed since Stephen's departure. Meanwhile, taking my valise in my left hand and keeping my cane in my right, I made my way toward the miraculously surviving drama. As I approached, looking more closely at the bar house, the ordinary large house gradually over the decades took on the features of a typical mansion typical of the northwestern region. One story with a roof island and attic with boarded-up windows. A handsome, carved, oak door and leather iron lanterns hung on either side of the front entrance above the entrance itself, painted portico supported by 4 antique-style columns, which gave the house itself a certain playfulness and frivolity. But despite the mix of architectural styles, the house inspired an unmotivated fear. Its seemingly frivolous architectural excesses not only did not soften this impression, but instead gave the house an inexplicable gloominess and mystery. I was unfamiliar with this architectural style peculiar to these gloomy, swampy woods. Behind the house stretched a dense business forest stretching for many kilometers. The front was closely adjoined by an old neglected park, in which once well-kept fruit trees protruded from yellowed weeds, spreading their branches like Black Oscar's evil hands. The facade of the mansion. There was that painted in yellow-green color, the light of bureaucratic boredom, and about that vividly creepy. However, from painting little remained, as the plaster mostly fell off. Survived triangular gables and above the windows, whose Renaissance austerity has been softened, and the plaster wigs are tall. The narrow 3 or 4 windows reminded me of the end of history and the former greatness of the owners, leaning lightly on a cane. I approached the front doors at the entrance. Suddenly, a sense of inexplicable danger made me look back. Right behind my back, about 3 meters away, pinning his ears and menacingly here motionless, froze a huge gray wolf. He didn't make a sound, only not dog-like lower his fluffy tail to his hind legs. His fierce, non-running gaze on his bloodshot eyes held me as if in its crosshairs. Who is it? An unexpected voice in the silence brought me out of my daze. Trying not to make any sudden movements, I slowly turned around. On the stone porch stood a gray-haired old man, clutching a long antique shotgun pointed at me. It was clear that it was loaded, as there was a smoking wick in his left hand, which he held down with his thumb. He had a rather brave appearance, a tanned, wrinkled face, on his head, on a genuine white wig, thin, taut in the room, tied with a wide belt, similar to Slutskys on legs spread apart, soft, brown boots with busy upward noses. Grandfather, in spite of his tender age, held a rifle, very confidently ready to fire at any moment from such a distance it was impossible to miss. I set the valise down carefully and held up my hands. "Don't shoot. I am from Street Petersburg. I have business with your mistress." I tried to speak smoothly, so as not to frighten the old soldier. The old man was silent, apparently trying to decide what to do. I smiled. "My name is Stephen Marlowe. Report me to Mrs. Russian." My voice was sweeter than honey. "There is no Mistress Ruska Jadwiga here. The mistress of this manor." Importantly, said the old man in Russian, "Her brother." I was relieved. It seemed I had come to the right place. Now it was very important to meet with the mistress and learn from her about the fate of the collection. The old man grabbed his gun and disappeared out the door. I turned my head. The wolf was still standing behind my back, keeping his yellow eyes on me. Finally, the door opened again and the same old man appeared on the porch, but this time without a gun. "Pani Jadwiga asked you to come through." The old man opened the door, letting me into the house. Elegantly bowing my head and crossing the threshold, I looked back. The wolf was gone. I looked up, and looked up at the piercing blue sky with white clouds, and the blue sun hangs in the sky for a long time, as if it doesn't want to give up its rights to the night. But then, as if realizing, it instantly disappears and darkness falls on the earth. I climbed up to the voyage and stepped inside the house, the musty air of old age and decay. It hit me in the face. I looked around. A spacious hallway of its own size, more like a dance hall. A wooden staircase leading up to the attics. In the right corner of the hall, a large fireplace made of wild stone, which was brought to these places 1,000 years ago by a glacier. It was obvious that the fire had recently been lit on the walls of the temples with ancient paintings by long-forgotten artists, mixed with hunting trophies. The horns of skull heads of animals, hunted at different times, were placed on special medallions covered with black lacquer. From time, the lacquer in some places was drawn and crumbled, which gave the interior some sinister part. From the ceiling on chains, from the paddle, a huge bronze chandelier with lice, a gorocomb of candles, like the fireplace. It too had been recently lit. A bit of furniture, worn, upholstered, and an ebony table completed the interior. From the hall to the depths of the house led several doors, and I stopped in indecision. What can I do for the gentleman? An elderly lady, accompanied by a young maiden, came out to meet me. "Allow me to introduce myself. Marlowe Stephen the antiquary." I bowed my head. "I have business with you. We could talk in private." I did not want to start a serious conversation on the fly in the presence of a stranger, especially since I recognized in the girl the very drunkenness for which I got into a fight with the local Don Juan. Judging by the sparkling eyes, the girl also recognized me, but she tried not to show it. "I have no secrets from my niece." The lady threw her head down angrily. "Cindy, make us some coffee. Let's go into the living room." The hostess made an inviting gesture and headed for one of the doors. We were seated in the large room at a round table. Cindy brought a tray from the coffee pot and cups and poured the coffee. I took a sip out of politeness and marveled. The coffee was very good. "So what business do you have with me?" the hostess said dryly and looked me in the eye. I outlined the essence of the matter, telling about a favorable deal on the sale of the collection. I was ready to pay the money right now in gold or assignats. I was trying to say something else when the landlady stopped me. "My brother spent his life wandering the world, collecting his vile collection. God punished him for it by giving him a disease that killed him. He left behind Cindy, his daughter. Who the mother is, I don't know. That's another of his sins." I looked at the Japanese woman. She had her head down. and was not at all like the unleashed maiden I had seen in the cards. "I have burned this lewd gathering so that it will not tempt anyone," continued the hostess. "That will be all, Mr. Marlowe. I think the matter is over. It's too late to spend the night at the manor. Tomorrow Jack will take you to the nearest whiskey." She got up and left without saying goodbye, followed by Cindy. After a quick glance at me, Jack, who acted as a watchman and footman, led me into a room that had apparently been a study. A desk, an armchair, a sofa against the wall, and a fireplace. Above the sofa was a portrait of a beautiful young woman in a dress with letters. I did not want to go to bed and decided to spend the night on the sofa. I put my valise at the headboard, put my revolver under the pillow, and placed my cane next to it. God protects the wiser. I was already asleep when there was a knock at the door. Jack brought supper. A long tablecloth, white on starch, was tentatively set on the table. As if by magic, even bowls of sauerkraut, pickles, and pickled breasts appeared, separated by a footman. A bowl of raw eggs on a small plate lay neatly on a reasonable lard with a solid meat layer. Finally, a hot cast iron with stew, potatoes, and a wonderful one appeared on the table. Jack went out and quickly returned with a Countess Wild cold vodka. Here now the still life could be considered finished while I ate. It was already getting dark. The sun was hidden behind a reasonable fence from the tops of fir trees immediately pulled cold. Autumn was inexorably taking its toll. Jack. He melted the fireplace and said good night to me. Having settled down on the sofa, I drank vodka. Pleasant warmth began to develop slowly. Moonlight penetrated into the room through the long-ago unwashed window, leaving a light path on the floor and wall. I closed my eyes. The events of the past day raced through my head, keeping me awake. I lay blissfully awake. All over my body was paying out, sweet from home. For the first time in ages, I felt calm and peaceful. I glanced at my watch in the not-too-bright glow of the eternal flame. The hand showed 22 o'clock, early by city standards. But here in the forest wilderness, it was late night. Life surrounded by wild, untouched nature seemed to me clear and simple. One should get up at dawn, go hunting, fishing for mushrooms, have dinner in the evening, and go to bed early. Forest, swamps, gun, fire, lack of stress, and a healthy lifestyle contribute to longevity. I envy the people who live here. I'd give up everything to live here in the middle of nowhere and live out my life in peace and quiet. I thought, falling asleep. I didn't understand why I woke up. I lay there for a few minutes, pondered where I then opened my eyes. The candle was burning and went out, but the room was quite bright from the color of the full moon streaming through the window. Suddenly, a distinctive sound came from the hallway, slamming the door. I sat up and took the revolver in my hand. What is it? Without putting on my boots, I went to the door and listened. Someone was walking slowly down the hall. Could it be Jack going around the house? Acting as watchman or landlady, unable to sleep, snapped loudly, and the sound of footsteps came closer and closer. I opened the door slightly. I could clearly see a part of the corridor, dedicated by moonlight. Well could be heard. Footsteps clinked together, but I couldn't see anyone. I began to feel uneasy. It was damned funny. From outside, the faint but distinct barking of a dog reached me. I went back to the window and looked down, but I couldn't see anyone, no matter how hard I tried. As soon as I heard that barking, goosebumps ran down my spine. Even now, years later, it's hard for me to say why I reacted the way I did to an ordinary dog barking. But back then, in the house, I only gripped the grip of my revolver tighter. I listened. The footsteps died away, and I suddenly realized that there was someone or something at the door. And somehow I was sure that something terrible was waiting for me. Trying to make as little noise as possible, I slowly cocked the trigger with my thumb, cautiously approached the door, and then swung it open. Meanwhile, life together with Sebastian Lisa seemed like paradise at first. She bathed in his love, paying little attention to what was going on around the money, actually stolen from her husband. She gave it to Christopher for safekeeping. He lucidly explained to Lisa that it would be more secure with him. But after a while, Lisa began to feel a guilty conscience. She was worried that she had been so mean to Stephen, abandoning and robbing her own husband. It wasn't easy to get it out of her head. She tried to forget herself in unrestrained merriment, but the black thoughts came back to her and kept her awake, especially at night. Sebastian and Christopher told Lisa about the bright prospects of the near future. Sebastian suggested going to the church court and asking for permission to hear, but Lisa realized that her chances of becoming a free woman were very slim. True, there was one catch. If she could accuse her husband of adultery, even the church court could rule favorably on her case. When she had spoken to Sebastian about it, he had grasped at that straw with enthusiasm. It was only a matter of finding bride witnesses and filing for divorce. At the same time, Lisa and her brother decided to petition the emperor for the return of Lisa, title, and nobility. Her husband had taken advantage of her family's plight and almost forcibly married her. Here, too, there was hope that all would turn out well. In the meantime, Lisa and her friends continued to spend Stephen's money without denying themselves anything. But no matter how much Lisa tried to forget herself, she waited with fear for her husband's return, realizing that under the law of the empire, he had every right to forcibly bring her home. One evening, as she and Sebastian drank a bottle of Chateau Renault, Lisa asked her lover what they would do if the courts didn't work out. Sebastian thought for a moment, then said, "I have good connections with the social revolutionaries. They're quiet now, but I can make arrangements with the right people, and your Stephen will be gone in one fell swoop." Lisa shuddered at these words, but her status as a widow promised her tantalizing prospects. Giving her access to Stephen's main money, she wiped away her tears and smiled blissfully. Meanwhile, I cautiously approached the door and then swung it open sharply. No one was there. I only felt a slight breeze blowing in. Without letting go of my weapon, I stepped out into the hallway and made my way down the hall. All was quiet. There was something lying on the bottom step of the stairs leading to the attic. I bent down and gingerly picked up a small object, a small spearhead made of white metal, most likely silver. It had a leather lanyard on it. It was an amulet. Apparently, it had once adorned the chest of a warrior. The amulet was made in the Oriental style and decorated with intricate ornaments. Did someone drop it or plant it on purpose? I took it in my hand. How could it not be here? I decided to appropriate it. Putting the amulet in my pants pocket, I went back into the room, closed the door at the ankle, and laid down on the couch again. After a while, sleep watched me. I woke up to a chilling, howling human scream. Yes, carrying everything from the street. A gunshot rang out. I rushed down the stairs, shoving my feet into my boots as I went. Hardly had I run out of the house when a flock of bats flew over my head, flapping their wings loudly. I turned my head and saw a vague shadow flicker in the distance. A group of hastily dressed people were crowding about 50 meters away from the house. As I got closer, I saw the body of a confused man lying on the ground. He was already dying. His voice was weakened. He kept mumbling something in an unknown language. Then he stretched out and froze forever, turning into a heap of ugly flesh on the soft earth around him and wiping the body anew. The footprints of some giant animal were clearly visible. Two men covered the body with leather and dragged it onto a stretcher. The mistress standing nearby wrapped a woolen shawl around the body, then said something quietly to Jack, who held the billet, the gun, and slowly walked toward the house. No one paid the slightest attention to me. The people around me seemed to understand perfectly well what the matter was, and to them there was nothing unusual about it. I put my revolver behind my belt and walked to the door of the study. I had a feeling that there was someone inside. I cautiously opened the door and saw a female figure on the sofa, illuminated by the bright moonlight. Hearing the door creak open, the woman turned around. God, I even flinched. It was Cindy. Illuminated by the moonlight, beautiful face, the same white dress. The girl walked up to me without saying a word. She took my hand and led me to the couch. From surprise, I lost the ability to resist. I woke up from a hot, long kiss. I carefully moved away from the young body. "I'm sorry, I can't. I have a wife." I mumbled a little audibly. "She's not here." "I want you." She covered my face with kisses, trying to pull my jacket off my shoulders. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a prude or a slacker. I've had women in my life, young and not so young, but I've been married. And most importantly, I love my wife. I couldn't go back on the vows I made at the altar. To be together for better or for worse, to die on the same day. "I'm sorry, Cindy. I can't. You're very beautiful, but I'm not free." I said something else, trying not to offend the girl by saying no. Finally, she quieted down and just sat there, pressed against me. "Are you looking for a collection or something?" Suddenly she asked, fixing her bangs. Pani Jadwiga burned it, but a small part of it survived. "I'll show you." She was silent for a moment, as if hesitating to tell me something. "I'll show you where it's hidden, but you'll take me away from here," she said firmly. "Where from?" the surprise. I asked a stupid question. "I don't care where. As long as it's away from here. I can't stay here any longer." The lady grabbed me from Mr. Corbin. "He's in his 70s. He's already paid for me in gold." Cindy suddenly sobbed. "I'd rather drown myself. What's life like that? She's your aunt." I shuddered at her sobs. "She's not my aunt. I'm her brother's adopted daughter. He took me from the orphanage 6 years ago, kept me here until he died. Now my aunt wants to make a profit off me." Cindy grabbed my hand. "Take me out of here. I'm gonna be lost anyway." She fixed her bangs again with that familiar motion. I'd seen it before, but I couldn't remember anyone who'd ever done it. In fact, Cindy reminded me of someone. But who? I looked at the beautiful face. I stroked the silks, the clean hair. It gave off an odor, the faint scent of drunken jasmine. It was as if I could read her mind. "Take me away, my love. Don't leave me," she whispered. "I've waited so long for you, love and moons." The scent of jasmine. The girl lit the lantern and stood up. "Come, I'll show you the collection." I stood in a damp cellar, and before me on a hastily made fairy tale of rotten floorboards, on a pedestal stood a coffin covered with mold and bits of clay. It was evident that it had long rested in the cemetery soil. Once made of oak planks, it was now a pitiful sight. The lid was pulled off, and well-preserved human remains came into view. In some places the bones were shattered, but on the whole the skeleton was well preserved. The skull with long hair, fangs, and empty eye sockets. Next to the skeleton lay a sword. But even without this attribute, it was clear to me that it was a warrior. But that's not what struck me. On the chest of your corpse on a leather lanyard hung an amulet, exactly like the one I found on the stairs 2 hours earlier. I don't know why, but I was suddenly overcome with terror. I lost the ability to think and move. A creature with brightly glowing eyes was approaching me. It came so close that I could hear its angry breathing. Suddenly it grabbed me with its paws and teeth, batted at my neck. I felt the pain of the bite, and a warm trickle of blood ran down my chest. I snapped out of my fake nightmare. The sun was shining outside the window. On the table was a white towel-covered breakfast of toasted slices of white bread, butter, and a pot of hot coffee. Honestly, I didn't yet realize where was dream and where was reality. I remembered well how the jar and I had gone down to the basement, how she had shown me the straw-covered boxes that held the cloth-wrapped wooden figures. Even at first glance, they were worth a fabulous amount of money. Then Cindy left, and I fell into this nightmare. I even leaned in. It was so natural. Well, it was time to leave. Just how to get the collection and the pit. The door shrieked and Jack came in. "Good morning, Baron," he said respectfully. "Cindy has told me everything." "Help her, Baron. She's a good girl. She doesn't belong here." Jack wished with his lips and continued, "The wagon is ready for you." I've put the boxes of dolls in there and covered them with hay. Cindy will be waiting for us at the fork behind the old cemetery. It's not far from here. Mrs. Jadwiga has gone to Kuma's and won't be back until tonight. I'll take you straight to the station. Hurry up, Baron. In the meantime, I don't think there'll be any trouble." Sebastian took a sip of wine, clearly savoring the drink. "How soon we solve our case." Sebastian looked at Lisa. "What's the holdup?" "As soon as the object appears in the city, we do it right away. Don't worry, everything will be honorable and noble. The mosquito won't poke its nose in." The man sitting opposite Sebastian looked expressively at the empty bottle of Take Down the Satrap. "That's the only way to do it." Sebastian wrinkled his nose. "Is he drunk or what?" He nodded to the sex man. "Some kind of inadequate." But he didn't say anything out loud. The interlocutor was drinking a second bottle. After all, he was pestering about revolution and terror. They were starting to pay attention. Sebastian put the envelope with the money under the tablecloth and bowed out. "I'm waiting for the result on the street." Lisa cried. She suddenly felt sorry for her husband. But then she remembered the money and Sebastian, and the sadness receded. Ah, if only it could be done without killing. Sebastian jumped into the span and cradled his mistress's left body. Lisa sighed and kissed his cheek. "I love you so much, sweetheart." An hour later, we pulled up to the old cemetery, pulling in on both sides of the road. Judging by the general desolation, the gnarled monuments and broken hailstones, no one had been buried in the cemetery for a long time. There was silence all around. Not even the sound of the wind could be heard. The place was definitely haunted. I wandered at night between the mossy gravestones with inscriptions in an unknown language, which no one could read. I even got a little creepy. But I realized it wasn't ghosts I had to fear, it was living people. "Come on, Cindy. You picked a good place to meet." Jack looked at me with a frown, as if he'd read my mind in that abandoned January cemetery. There are such people in this land, and no one can read the inscriptions, not even the braves. The inscriptions are badly erased. I marveled at the knowledge of the village man. I'd heard something about them. They fought a long battle with the Slavs who came to this land from the west. The wars lasted for 100 years until these people assimilated with the invaders, but they preserved their language and their culture to this day. At the edge of the cemetery, Cindy was waiting for us, dressed in high-lifted traveling gowns. Seeing our carriage, she deftly jumped on it and smiled dreamily. Her thoughts were already in Street Petersburg. I did not share her optimism, if only because horsemen appeared from the turn. When they saw us, they quickly headed in our direction. It was immediately clear to me that we would not be able to escape. 4 armed guards of the county police, led by an associate. "Wait, who are they?" shouted the eldest, holding his horse. "People from out of town. We're going to the station." Did I answer as politely as possible? "We have documents." The ranger kept a suspicious look on my face. "Kuzmik, look, there's a girl." A young voice sounded behind me. I turned around. One of the guards had pulled Cindy's handkerchief off, and her blonde hair fell over her shoulders. "She's all right," the young one laughed. "Give me the papers." The guard leaned toward me and held out his hand. At that moment, there was an indignant shout from Cindy. The guard got off his horse and shamelessly searched for the girl to the loud laughter of his associates. "I thought you were the police, but you're a gang of guards." Disappointedly stretched out I. "Are you literate?" The town officer swung to hit me with a whip, but did not have time. The revolver struck the shot. The policeman dropped the whip and grabbed his arm. I ran up to him and pulled him off his horse, put the revolver to his temple. "Come on, hurry up," I shouted to his troops. Guns on the ground. Fearfully sticking their Glizzen Abbas at me, the soldiers slowly got off their horses. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands. I shot into the air. The horses bucked fearfully and rushed down the road. "You're finished," came the voice of the older man. "He'll rot at the penal colony." I did not deny myself the pleasure of striking him in the teeth with the handle of my revolver. Now he was busy, spitting out splinters of teeth with Jack's blood. Gather the guns in the cart, I commanded the valet. And don't shake. You'll be all right. While Jack panted, Cindy hopped off the wagon, quickly picked up the rifles that had been thrown on the road, then stood there as if thinking about something and quickly kicked the young guard in the butt with the toe of her boot. He screamed and bent almost to the ground. Apparently, he was collecting eggs on the road. The officer, clamping his bloody mouth, found it necessary to keep silent. Now let's get out of here. I jumped into the cart and nodded to Jack. Pull the cart. Cheerfully jammed, body over the potholes, leaving behind defeated troops of the land police. Evenings. Soon the station was to appear. We drove through the forest and into a less well-maintained inn. The sound of hoof stomping reached my ear. A gendarme cavalry troop came out of the forest. Yes, these are not the Zemstvo police. They do it without blinking an eye, I thought. And that's a lot of military men today. Skokov in front of the detachment. The staff captain raised his hand. The horsemen surrounded us. Who are they? The commander spoke calmly, feeling behind him strength. We were on a visit. We're going to the station now. I spoke calmly too. The officer looked at his watch and suddenly said it's 2:00 before the train. So you'll make it in time. Marlowe, I looked carefully at the staff captain. Holy shit, it's Joe. Our bunks were next to each other at the junior college. This is the meeting. Joe jumped off his horse and came up to me. Well, hello devils. We hugged. Can I have a word with you? I touched my classmate's sleeve. We stepped aside, whispered a little. Then Lieutenant Redchinsky himself gave the order. Take the men and go back. There are policemen somewhere on the road. Pick them up and take their weapons from the cart. Smith and Joseph stay with me. We'll escort Mr. Marlowe to the station. The train arrived at Street Petersburg. Early in the morning, I hired a coachman and a loader. They moved the crates of dolls to the cart. Cindy and I got into the aisle and drove to my house. I decided not to keep anything from Lisa, knowing her kind nature. She must be sympathetic to the poor girl's plight. When I entered the apartment, my favorite wife did not meet me in the kitchen. Only the maid Wendy came up to meet me. She confusedly told me that Lisa had gone away a week ago with some young man and his brother. Well, I knew her brother. He was forgiving. 2 meetings were enough for me to turn him down. But who was the other one? From what the maid told me, Lisa ran away with my money. Not a great loss, but I left Cindy in Wendy's care. I sat down on the couch and thought about what to do next. I'd only been gone a little over a week. I'd already lost my wife and my money. Ugh, money. To hell with the wife. Here's the rub. What could have happened in such a short time that she had ruthlessly stepped over my love? For me, there was no alternative. Kick her to the curb. But still, what influenced her? Was it princely hubris or an unsatisfied vanity? I took out a bottle of cognac and poured myself a full shot. How is it our way? Drown your sorrows in cognac. But I didn't have time to drink it. There was a loud knock at the door. In a minute, Wendy brought into my office a young military-looking officer in a blue uniform, handed me a sealed Surguta packet. While I read, the sub-lieutenant stood silently and looked at me faithfully. Everything is clear. I folded the paper. Mr. Captain, the carriage is waiting downstairs. I've been ordered to bring you here at once. The officer clicked his heels kindly. Give me 15 minutes. I put the package on the table. I dressed quickly, shook the dust off my epaulets, and strapped on my checker. Wendy, take care of Cindy. I need to get away. I put on my cap. Ah, it sounded behind me. Cindy, eyes wide open, rushed in surprise at me dressed in an officer's uniform in full parade. I grinned in satisfaction. Damn it, it's nice to make young ladies lose their minds at the sight of you. His Excellency is about to perceive. The young adjutant grumbled and swung the door open. I walked across the soft carpet to a large oak table, at which sat a not yet old state general in a dress uniform. "Come in, Stephen." He waved his hand cordially, showing me to a soft leather sofa, in front of which stood a service table. The adjutant filled shot glasses and moved a plate with an appetizer. "I won't tell you what this is all about. You'll find out soon enough." Vaughn grinned slyly. "In an hour we are waiting for the sovereign." I even choked up cognac stuck in my throat. "Who is waiting?" I asked through a cough. "Your Majesty." His Excellency patted me on the back. "Let's have a drink and get on our way." The state councilor corrected a strand of hair that had fallen on his face with a familiar gesture. I even flinched. I couldn't stop thinking about Cindy as we walked down the long corridor. I was happy for her, if I wasn't mistaken. That girl was going to do well. A chamber footman ushered us into a huge hall. A burly, bearded man rose from behind a large miscellaneous table. Emperor Alexander II came out to meet us. We stopped and bowed our heads. Your Majesty started to share, but the Emperor stopped him with a gesture. "Why the unnecessary words, gentlemen? Tell me, Joseph, have you thought about my proposal?" The Emperor's voice was soft, but in it you could feel the hidden strength of a man who left the whole of Europe trembling. "Yes, my lord, I agree." Dennis looked faithfully into the Emperor's eyes. The Emperor nodded with satisfaction. "And you, Baron?" I didn't realize at first which raven we were talking about, except for the Emperor and us here. There was no one else in the hall. "He doesn't know yet." "Your Majesty," smiled Dennis. "He was not in Street Petersburg." Alexander II looked at me with a smile. 3 days ago, I granted your father nobility and the title of Baron for his invaluable help in building the Siberian Railroad. So you are now a second-generation Baron." The Emperor and Dennis laughed. "I want to appoint you Deputy Chief of the Palace Police," the Emperor continued, and looked at my companion. "That's his deputy. I didn't think for a long time." "I agree." "Well, then congratulations on the rank of Lieutenant Colonel." The Emperor sat down at the table. "Gentlemen, I give you a month to organize the department." Tonight I dined at a place not on the Moika. To tell you the truth, I didn't like the bohemian bustle of restaurants, but this evening I wanted to be among people. Loneliness was weighing me down. I didn't risk taking the whole with me. It looked very provincial. Knowing the morals of our unglamorous young ladies, I did not want to expose a nice girl to their ridicule. I was in euphoria from the events of today. First the news of Lisa's betrayal and escape, then the visit to the sovereign. A new appointment, a newly acquired title and rank, all of which would have made anyone's head spin. I was sitting alone at a table, away from the hustle and bustle of the world. When I heard a familiar laugh, I looked up. Almost opposite me was a group of young people, among whom my wife was laughing. Even from here I could see how she was looking at the gentleman with the thin mustache under his nose. Around their table the waiters were bustling. "Wine. Bring wine," one of the girls shouted loudly. And that's when Lisa saw me. Her face turned white. Her companion intercepted her gaze and stared at me too. Everything was mixed up in his gaze. Fear, insolence, arrogance. Without getting up, he summoned the maitre d'. "I always thought your restaurant was for a clean crowd." Deliberately loud so I could hear, he said. The noise at their table died down. Everyone stared at me in silence, expecting a scandal and my ignominious expulsion from the Restoration. "Yes, for the public that knows how to behave in a public place and with money," politely replied the meter man. "Then what's this bullshit doing here?" Sebastian nodded in my direction, and the maitre d' looked at me. I realized that Sebastian was known here, but it was the first time they had seen me. The maitre d' didn't know how to behave in such a case and didn't dare to do anything. I decided to come to his rescue. I rubbed my lips straight with a napkin, took my cane and approached a neighboring table. "Don't worry, my good man. I'll take care of it in a moment. It's just a minor misunderstanding." I smiled affectionately at Sebastian. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eliza turn even more pale with fear, clutching the Lezginka in her chair. I turned to my wife. "It seems to me that you have lost track of time. It's time to get ready to go home. There's a carriage waiting for us at the entrance." Sebastian jumped up. "Lisa isn't going anywhere." I looked at my lover in amazement. "My soul, who is that boy?" in my voice. Only a fool could fail to sense the obvious sneer. Lisa shook her head, unable to utter a word. "I would challenge you to a duel. You bastard." Sebastian was seething with rage. "But you're not a nobleman, so get out of here." He grabbed me by the lapel of my jacket, seriously intending to throw me out of this noble establishment. Two young Shegolevs, who were sitting at the table, came up to help him. Here I realized that it was time to act. I sharply hit Sebastian with my knee in the groin, and while he mooed in pain, he raked his privates into a heap. I dropped the cane and with two palms hit him in the ears. It's the kind of blow that bursts eardrums. The pain is unbelievable. Sebastian even forgot from the pain. But that wasn't enough for me. I hit him in the jaw with my right hand. Sebastian was thrown up, and he flew into a corner, picking his way into a pile of empty tables. I turned to his companions. The young men were already seated and looking at me fearfully. It looked like this was the first time they had seen such a fight. I picked up my cane, glad I didn't need my sword. "Lisa, I'm waiting," I said to my wife. "It's time to go." She silently got up and walked out. I slipped the maitre d' $5 for material and moral damage. He nodded understandingly, tucking the money into his breast pocket. I followed Lisa out the door. I didn't want to talk to that lying bastard at all. But it was a matter of principle. As long as she's my wife, she should be home. I'll throw her out. When will I finally decide what to do with her? In the morning, a policeman came and took me to the courthouse. The elderly judge took a long look at me and wrapped Sebastian's screws around which Lohankin was fussing. And the lawyer then asked me the question, "Why did you beat up this gentleman?" I shrugged. "The man attacked me in front of witnesses. I was only defending myself." The judge hummed and looked at the renamed Sebastian again. "But you don't have a scratch on you. Witnesses show that you beat him methodically." The judge menacingly, frowning his eyebrows. "Especially since this gentleman is a nobleman." "And you knew that?" "Yes, I did." "And what does that mean? Is his blood a different color, or is he immortal?" The judge was beginning to annoy me. The judge opened his mouth to put the boar in his place, which was me. As the courtroom creaked with boots cleaned, an adjutant of the chief of the palace police entered. He unceremoniously approached the judge and whispered something in his ear. The judge seemed to deflate. He looked at me with a completely different look. It was a look of genuine paternal concern. "Well, Stephen, why didn't you just say so?" He even stood up. "Mr. Baron, I'm dropping all charges against you. You are free to go." I stood up, turned around, and without looking at Mr. Sebastian, walked towards the exit. You should have seen the look on his face that very day. I brought the hole where they fight. They looked at each other in silence for a long time. Finally, a tear ran down Joseph's cheek. "Daddy!" The girl screamed and threw herself into her father's arms. What else can be added? Kinship is kinship. For years, Joseph was sure that his only daughter died in childbirth. I left the office without saying anything. They had a lot to talk about. A month later, the sovereign granted the divorce. I rented an apartment for Lisa and tried to forget her. You can imagine her state of mind when she found out she'd lost her nobility and title again. And the money, and her husband too. She tried to get back together with me, but as you can see, in vain. Betrayal is unforgivable. Lisa lived in Street Petersburg for a while, but then she sold her apartment and left. Her fate is unknown to me. Sebastian confused everything with the SRs and was soon shot by the police during an expropriation. Christopher Wyazemski lost at cards, so he was forced to sell the mortgaged estate. My father bought it and gave it to my mother as a reminder of her happy childhood. And I plunged into my work. I decided for myself no more women. Enough. What else but trouble can you expect from them? I distanced myself from Cindy in every way possible. Excuse me, Cindy Joseph. Joseph officially recognized her as his daughter. She must have been hoping for something. But I made it very clear that I would not marry her under any circumstances. Cindy seemed to calm down. She was now selling a collection of Russian, and I hardly saw her. One evening in late November, I was sitting in my office and leafed through a fresh catalog, which I sent me from old memory my agent in Berlin. The doorbell rang, and Wendy announced that Cindy had come to pick up her things. A few minutes later, she entered my office. In her hands was one of the sculptures we had taken out of a young African man holding a jug. Cindy set it on the stone shelf. "This is a keepsake for you." Then she gaped at us for a moment. I shrugged, playing off indifference. Cindy stood for a moment longer and then suddenly asked if I could have something to keep as a souvenir. "Cindy, take anything you want. I love that girl, but I couldn't help myself. Principals, gentlemen." "Thank you, Stephen." Blushing, Wendy called out. The maid brought an open bottle of champagne and 2 tall flutes. "Let's have a drink." Cindy sat down on the edge of the couch and handed me the wine flute. I lightly touched the rim of her flute and in one fell swoop drank the contents with the last thing I saw. Before I passed out Cindy's satisfied face, I opened my eyes to my chest. Something was pressing. I lowered my head slightly, and in the light of the boss I saw my female head. While building on my hairy chest, Cindy cautiously peeked under the blanket. Both me and the girl were unclothed. I didn't realize anything about how I ended up in bed with her. She felt me moving and opened her eyes. "You said yourself that I can take anything I want as a memento. So I took you." I wanted to say something, but she covered my mouth with a passionate kiss.